The silence comes first, not peace, just the heavy pause before indulgence. Gaslight hisses in the fog, and somewhere beneath your boots, London is already drinking. Behind locked doors and false walls, beneath respectable parlours and moral sermons, gin is being poured where it is not supposed to exist. Victorian London presents itself as orderly, sober, refined. But below the surface, another city breathes. A city of unlicensed pubs, hidden in cellars, back rooms, and basements. Here, smoke clings to the ceiling like a second skin. Gin scorches the throat. Coins slide across worn wood in silence. Every face is half-lit, every laugh restrained, every knock at the door a threat. These are places built on secrecy because too many depend on them for the illusion of escape. Before we go any further, take a moment to like this video and subscribe. It tells the platform you want more stories like this, slow, atmospheric, and honest. And let me know in the comments where you're watching from tonight. Somewhere quiet, somewhere hidden, somewhere familiar. Because these underground pubs were not just about drink. They were pressure valves in a city choking on rules. They served dock workers, clerks, widows, prostitutes, and gentlemen slumming in disguise. The law called them illegal, society called them shameful, London called them necessary. Tonight, we descend into that forgotten underworld where gin burned, smoke concealed faces, and Victorian respectability quietly collapsed beneath the streets. The city exhales before it speaks, not the clean breath of progress that Victorian London boasts in pamphlets and sermons, but a heavier breath, one that smells of damp brick, coal smoke, and spirits spilled long ago. Above ground, gas lamps glow with studied elegance. Carriages rattle over cobblestone. Men tip their hats. Women pass with eyes lowered. Respectability walks briskly, careful not to linger. But beneath the street, beneath the boots and wheels and promises of order, another London waits. It begins with a stare, often unmarked, sometimes disguised as a coal chute, sometimes hidden behind a shop counter or a false pantry door. The steps descend sharply, uneven and slick, worn smooth by countless feet that learned not to leave tracks. Down here, the air thickens, sound changes, laughter becomes muffled. Footsteps echo too loudly and then stop altogether, swallowed by low ceilings and brick walls, sweating with moisture. This is not a place meant for daylight. This is a place designed to be forgotten. Victorian London called itself the greatest city on earth, a capital of industry, empire, science, and moral improvement. It passed laws to regulate drink, to discipline behavior, to polish the image of a nation that believed sobriety was the same as virtue. Yet even as those laws were written, signed, and enforced, the city continued to drink. It simply learned to do so quietly. Beneath respectable homes and thriving shops, underground pubs multiplied. Cellars became taverns. Storage rooms became bars. Vaults meant for coal or wine transformed into refuges, where gin flowed without license or oversight. No swinging signs marked their presence. No songs spilled into the street. These places survived by silence, by discretion, by the shared understanding that everyone inside had something to lose. The patrons arrived one by one, rarely together. Dock workers with hands cracked from rope and salt. Seamstresses whose fingers bled onto cloth all day and reached for numbness at night. Clerks who spent their hours calculating figures that never favored them. Women with no polite title left to claim. Men who wore clean coats above ground and shed them the moment they descended. Here, class softened. Names blurred. Faces half disappeared in smoke. Gin was the great equalizer. Cheap, harsh, and powerful, it burned away hunger, cold, and conscience with ruthless efficiency. Mixed with sugar when possible, diluted when necessary, sometimes adulterated with substances no one bothered to name. It was not meant to be savored. It was meant to silence. A few mouthfuls could turn despair into warmth, fear into laughter, pain into distance. For a while, smoke was everywhere. Pipes, cheap cigars, damp tobacco that refused to burn cleanly. It curled along the ceiling, clung to hair and clothes, stung the eyes just enough to make recognition difficult. Smoke protected identities. It blurred faces. It softened memory. In a city obsessed with watching itself, smoke was privacy. These underground pubs were not accidents. They were responses. Pressure valves in a city that demanded obedience without offering relief. Victorian morality preached restraint while factory whistles screamed before dawn and workhouses loomed as punishment for failure. Drink became rebellion by necessity, and when rebellion was outlawed, it went underground. Every sound carried weight here. A laugh too loud could draw attention. A chair scraping across stone might still the room, and the knock, always the knock, could freeze blood in the veins. One rap might mean a friend, two might mean business, three could mean nothing good at all. The door was never opened without a pause, a breath held collectively, a glance exchanged in silence. The law called these places illegal. Reformers called them shameful. Newspapers called them symptoms of decay. Yet night after night, they filled. Because beneath the surface of Victorian London, beneath its polished sermons and iron rules, the city needed somewhere to go when the weight became unbearable. This was the other city, not written into guidebooks, not preserved in portraits, but alive, breathing, drinking, and waiting beneath the street. Before it was hidden, before it was whispered about in cellars and back rooms, gin was everywhere. It flowed openly, shamelessly, as common as bread and nearly as cheap. Long before Victorian London learned to drink in silence, England learned to drink in excess. Gin did not creep into the city, it flooded it. Clear, sharp, and brutally efficient, it promised warmth in cold rooms, courage in hopeless lives, and forgetfulness where memory hurt too much to bear. The drink arrived quietly at first, imported spirits distilled from grain, refined on the continent, and welcomed by a government eager to weaken dependence on foreign wine and brandy. But once the knowledge of distillation spread, gin ceased to be a luxury. It became domestic. It could be made anywhere: backrooms, sheds, kitchens. Any place with grain, water, and fire could produce it. And soon they did. By the early 18th century, London was drowning. Gin shops multiplied faster than churches. Vendors sold it from windows, wheelbarrows, and street stalls. Mothers quieted crying infants with it. Labourers swallowed it before dawn and after dark. The city drank because it could, and because life gave it little reason not to. Wages were low, housing was filth, disease stalked every alley. Gin did not fix these things, but it softened their edges. For a moment, moral panic followed, as it always does. Pamphlets warned of ruin. Artists etched nightmares of drunken mothers dropping children into open graves. Clergymen thundered from pulpits about decay and damnation. Parliament responded not with understanding, but with control. The Gin Acts arrived one after another, clumsy and punitive, raising prices, restricting sales, criminalizing what had already become habit. But habits do not vanish when outlawed. They adapt. Victorian Britain inherited this war on gin, a war already lost by the time the gas lamps were lit. The middle classes congratulated themselves on sobriety, on beer instead of spirits, on moderation as proof of moral superiority. Yet beneath this polished image, gin never left. It simply learned discretion. It learned doors without signs. It learned staircases that led downward instead of inward. The irony was complete. The same nation that had raised generations on cheap spirits now condemned them for drinking. Gin was blamed for poverty, violence, laziness, moral collapse, anything except the conditions that made it irresistible. The drink became the sin because it was easier to punish a bottle than a system. By the Victorian era, gin had acquired a dual identity. Above ground, it was shameful, something whispered about, something blamed. Below ground, it was necessity, comfort, escape, a familiar burn in a city that asked too much and gave too little back. Underground pubs did not invent gin culture. They inherited it. The people who descended into those cellars were not rebels by nature. They were heirs. Heirs to a nation that had taught them, quietly and thoroughly, that endurance required numbness. That cold could be defeated chemically. That hunger could be postponed with intoxication. That silence could be purchased by the glass. And so gin followed them downward. It burned stronger below street level, stripped of ceremony and dilution. There were no crystal decanters here, no measured pours. The liquid was cloudy more often than not, flavored with sugar when available, bitter when not. It was swallowed quickly, not admired. It did not ask questions. It did not judge. It simply worked. Victorian reformers would later speak of underground drinking as moral failure, as evidence of corruption lurking in the shadows. But they ignored the truth written into every glass. Gin was not a vice imported into the poor, it was a legacy imposed upon them, a national habit born in desperation and sustained by neglect. By the time gin disappeared from the streets, it had already claimed its place beneath them, and once it learned to hide, it would never truly leave again. The law arrived with confidence, printed neatly, debated loudly, enforced unevenly. The Gin Acts promised order where panic had reigned. Parliament believed that regulation could cauterize excess, that by raising prices, licensing cellars, and threatening punishment, the nation could simply legislate sobriety into existence. On paper, it looked decisive. On the streets, it changed almost nothing. What the Gin Acts truly accomplished was not temperance, but invention. Licenses became expensive, fines became ruinous, public selling became dangerous, and so the drink did what it had always done. In England it adapted. Gin did not vanish, it slipped sideways. It stepped backward, it descended. Where once a sign might swing openly above a doorway, now there was only brick. Where a window once displayed bottles, it now displayed nothing at all. The city learned a new grammar of concealment. Drinkers learned to read it quickly. A shop that sold nothing but candles, yet stayed open late. A greengrocer whose cellar was never empty. A tailor whose back room smelled faintly of juniper and smoke. The Gin Act made criminals of ordinary people overnight. Not smugglers or gang leaders, shopkeepers, widows, labourers, supplementing impossible wages. Selling drink without a license was no longer a petty offence. It was defiance. And defiance required discretion. The architecture of London responded accordingly. False walls appeared where none had existed before. Trapdoors were cut into floorboards and disguised beneath rugs. Shelves were built to slide. Staircases narrowed and bent to prevent clear sightlines. Cellars were divided into chambers so that one room could be sacrificed if another needed to survive. This was not chaos, it was careful design. Entry became ritual. You did not simply walk in. You knocked. You waited. Sometimes you were turned away, for no clear reason at all. Trust was currency. Regulars were remembered. New faces were studied under dim light, evaluated by posture, speech, hesitation. A single careless word could close a door forever. The law imagined enforcement as raids and arrests. In reality, it was a slow game of pressure and evasion. Policemen were underpaid. Publicans were desperate. Bribes passed quietly. Warnings were given in advance. Sometimes the door was never opened at all. The law knocked, and silence answered. Above ground, the Gin Acts were praised as moral victories. Below ground, they were treated as weather, something to endure, something that could not be argued with, only planned around. Underground pubs kept no ledgers. Names were never written. Conversations avoided specifics. No one asked where the gin came from. and no one answered. Punishment was real enough to be feared. Fines could destroy a household. Prison could separate families already hanging by a thread. Yet even this threat failed to stop the trade, because the need remained stronger than the risk. Hunger did not disappear because Parliament disapproved of coping mechanisms. Cold did not retreat because temperance pamphlets said it should. And so the Gin Act became a quiet teacher. It taught London how to hide itself from its own ideals. What had once been visible became invisible. What had once been noisy became hushed. Drinking did not end, it became private, compressed, more intense. In hidden pubs, people drank faster, deeper, with urgency sharpened by fear. There was no lingering over glasses. There was no safety in daylight. There was only now. The city above congratulated itself on order. The city below refined its silence. In trying to erase gin from public life, the law ensured its survival in the shadows. And in doing so, it transformed drinking from habit into secret binding it forever to the underworld of Victorian London, where concealment was not just a skill, but an art. The city learned to hollow itself out. Beneath the pavement, beneath the routines and rituals of respectable life, Victorian London reshaped its own body to make room for what it refused to acknowledge. These underground pubs were not thrown together carelessly. They were engineered quietly, deliberately, by people who understood that survival depended on invisibility. The cellar became the foundation of secrecy. Nearly every building had one. Intended for coal, storage, or perishables, cellars were expected to be dark, cold, and unseen. No questions were asked about what happened below ground because nothing respectable was meant to happen there at all. That assumption made cellars perfect. They were already hidden, already ignored, already beneath notice. Brick walls were thickened to dull sound. Ceilings were kept low so voices would not rise. Floors above were reinforced to prevent telltale vibrations. In some houses, the cellar ceiling was deliberately layered with straw, cloth, or timber scraps to muffle laughter and the scrape of chairs. Silence, here, was a construction material. Vaults were even better. Old wine vaults beneath merchants' homes, abandoned storage chambers beneath churches, forgotten basements from earlier centuries. These spaces offered depth and distance from the street. The further down one went, the safer one felt. Each step removed the drinker from law, daylight, and consequence. These were places where time slowed and names dissolved. False walls were the final innovation. They slid, folded, or swung inward with practiced ease. Behind them were bottles, benches, narrow rooms barely wide enough to stand shoulder to shoulder. In some establishments, the first room was a decoy, bare, empty, legal in appearance. If the law came down the stairs, that was all they saw. The real pub waited beyond brick and wood that did not exist unless summoned. Passageways were designed for confusion, sharp turns, narrow throats, doors that opened only one way. In a raid, unfamiliar feet would hesitate, while regulars knew exactly where to move. Some cellars had multiple exits, back alleys, neighboring basements, shared tunnels cut long ago for reasons no one remembered clearly. Escape was never guaranteed, but it was always considered. Light was controlled with care. Too bright, and faces could be identified. Too dim, and accidents multiplied. Candles were shielded, lamps were hooded, smoke did the rest. The haze softened edges, blurred features, made memory unreliable. A man seen in such light could not easily be described later. A woman could vanish into shadow the moment she stood. Furniture was crude but intentional. Benches were bolted down so they could not be used as weapons or thrown in panic. Tables were small, forcing people close, encouraging quiet conversation. Nothing was decorative. Nothing was unnecessary. Everything had a purpose related to staying unnoticed. Even smell was considered. Gin carried a sharp, unmistakable scent. To mask it, Cellars reeked of tobacco, damp wood, coal dust, spilled beer, and human sweat. These were not pleasant odors, but they were ordinary ones. If scent drifted upward, it blended into the larger stink of Victorian London, a city already saturated with smoke and waste. These underground spaces created a strange intimacy. People sat closer than they would above ground. Conversations were shorter, more personal, more urgent. There was no room for spectacle, no room for performance. What remained was need unpolished and shared. To the law, these places were violations. To reformers, they were dens of vice. But to those who built them, they were shelters. Crude, dangerous, illegal shelters, but shelters all the same. Architecture became an accomplice. Brick and timber took sides. Above ground, Victorian London pretended to be clean, rational, improving. Below ground, it admitted the truth, that a city this vast, this demanding, this unforgiving required places where rules loosened and silence was allowed to drink. And so the cellars endured quiet chambers of resistance carved into the bones of the city, holding the weight of secrets London refused to carry in the light. Sound mattered underground in a way it never did above. On the street, noise dissolved into the endless churn of London hooves, wheels, voices, iron, steam. Below ground, every sound arrived alone. Each footstep had intent. Each breath carried weight. And no sound mattered more than the knock. It was never casual. No one pounded on the door. No one rattled the handle. That kind of carelessness belonged to daylight. Here, a knock was measured, rehearsed, remembered. One tap could mean a mistake. Two might mean impatience. Three was dangerous if delivered wrong. Each underground pub developed its own language of entry, a pattern learned through repetition and passed quietly from mouth to ear. Not written, not explained openly. You learned it by being shown, or you didn't learn it at all, and, if you didn't know, the door stayed closed. The door itself was rarely impressive. Often it looked like nothing at all, a cellar hatch, a pantry door, a piece of wall disguised beneath shelving. Some were reinforced with iron brackets or hidden bolts, not to keep people in, but to keep the wrong people out. It opened inward, always inward, so it could be shut quickly and silently if needed. On the other side of that door, the pause came, a pause long enough to sharpen fear, long enough to make the knocker regret the attempt. In that silence, eyes met. Conversations died mid-sentence. Hands tightened around glasses. Someone near the door shifted closer, listening for sounds above boots on stone. Voices raised too formally to be trusted. Only then came the answer. Sometimes it was a voice. Sometimes a sliding panel opened just wide enough for eyes to meet. Faces were studied carefully in the low light. Was this a regular? A friend of a friend? A stranger whose coat was too clean, whose posture was too straight, whose gaze lingered too long? Trust was not assumed. It was evaluated. For regulars, entry became almost ceremonial. A nod, a familiar knock, a door opened just far enough. For newcomers, the process was slower. Names were exchanged cautiously, often false ones. A reference might be requested: who sent you, who vouches for you, who will answer when questions come later. Some were turned away without explanation. The door opened briefly, then closed. No apology, no argument. You did not knock twice after that. Doing so marked you as either foolish or dangerous. Neither was welcome. Inside, the knock lingered in memory. Conversations resumed slowly, cautiously. Laughter returned in fragments. The drinker who had been mid-sip finished it too quickly, just in case. The knock reminded everyone why they were here and why they could not afford to forget where they were. False knocks existed too. Police learned quickly that force failed more often than patience. Some tried to imitate the patterns. Others sent informants ahead, hoping familiarity would do what authority could not. Occasionally, it worked. More often, it didn't. The underground adjusted faster than the law ever could. Patterns changed, codes evolved, doors moved. In some pubs, a wrong knock meant immediate silence and darkness. Lamps extinguished, bottles hidden. People pressed flat against walls until the threat passed. In others, a decoy door absorbed the danger, while the real room held its breath behind brick and wood that pretended not to exist. The knock was more than a signal. It was a reminder of vulnerability. Every entry carried risk. Every gathering was temporary. No one truly belonged there, not in the way one belongs to a home or a parish or a licensed pub with a name above the door. This was borrowed space, conditional space, a refuge that could collapse with a single mistake. And yet, the knock continued, night after night. Because the fear outside was worse than the fear at the door. Because silence upstairs was heavier than whispers below. Because in a city built on surveillance and judgment, even a dangerous welcome was better than none at all. So they knocked, and they waited. The smoke comes quickly, and it never fully leaves. It coils upward from pipes and cheap cigars, from damp tobacco that smoulders more than it burns, from coal dust disturbed by shifting feet and low voices. In the underground pubs of Victorian London, smoke is not indulgence, it is architecture. It reshapes the room as surely as brick and timber, turning space into concealment. Above ground, smoke is nuisance, something to be waved away, complained about, blamed for coughing fits and stained curtains. Below ground, it is protection. It blurs faces, softens outlines, erases the fine details that memory relies on. In smoke, a man becomes a silhouette. A woman becomes movement rather than feature. Should anyone be asked later to describe who they saw, uncertainty does the rest. The air grows heavy quickly, eyes sting, throats dry. But no one complains. Clean air is dangerous air. Clear vision is a liability. The haze is welcome, even necessary. A room without smoke feels exposed, unfinished, too honest. Smoke also masks scent, and scent is betrayal. Gin carries a sharp, botanical tang that lingers long after the glass is empty. Without smoke, it drifts upward through floorboards and stairwells, announcing itself to landlords and constables alike. Tobacco dulls it, coal deepens it, human sweat completes the disguise. Together, they form a smell so common in Victorian London that no one bothers to investigate it further. Everything smells like something unpleasant. That anonymity is survival. The act of smoking becomes communal, almost ritualistic. Pipes are shared, matches passed quietly. A stranger who refuses tobacco draws attention in the wrong way. Participation signals belonging. Smoke marks you as someone who understands the rules of the room. Conversations change within it, words soften, voices lower, arguments lose their edge. The haze absorbs sharpness, turning conflict into murmur. Even laughter arrives muted, filtered through layers of suspended air. The smoke enforces discretion without instruction. It also creates distance. People sit closer together in these underground rooms, yet the smoke prevents true intimacy. Faces are close but never fully seen. Expressions are guessed rather than read. This ambiguity is comforting. You can speak without being fully known. You can drink without being fully recognized. Tomorrow, you might pass someone on the street and never be certain it was them. The law understands none of this. Reformers speak of smoke as moral filth, as physical evidence of vice. They imagine clear rooms filled with orderly behavior, unaware that clarity itself would destroy these spaces. Smoke is not excess, it is strategy. When raids happen, smoke becomes chaos. Eyes struggle to adjust. Officers stumble over benches they cannot fully see. Regulars move with practiced familiarity, guided by memory rather than sight. In the confusion, doors close. False walls slide. People vanish into spaces that seem not to exist. The smoke slows everyone, but it favors those who know the room. There is danger in it too. Candles flare unexpectedly. Coughing fits reveal nerves. Lungs suffer quietly, long before anyone names the cause. But danger is accepted here as part of the bargain. Every protection carries a cost. By morning, the smoke clings to hair and clothes. It follows drinkers back up the stairs into daylight and obligation. Some scrub it away carefully. Others let it linger, a private reminder of the night below. Victorian London pretends to fear smoke while building its entire existence upon it. Factories, homes, engines, progress itself. Underground pubs simply repurpose what the city already produces in abundance. They turn pollution into privacy, haze into shelter. In the half-lit rooms beneath the street, smoke does what walls alone cannot. It keeps secrets suspended in the air, just out of reach, long enough for another night to pass unseen. They are rarely what you expect. The unlicensed publican does not look like a criminal. There is no uniform of rebellion, no shared face among them. Some are widows with tired eyes and careful hands. Some are former shopkeepers pushed sideways by debt. Some are laborers who realize that pouring gin paid better than breaking their backs for someone else's profit. A few are men who once held licenses and lost them by law, by misfortune, or by refusing to play along with the right people. What unites them is not ambition, but necessity. Running an underground pub is not glamorous work. It is vigilance without rest. Every night is risk measured in ounces and footsteps. The publican listens more than they speak. They watch the door, the room, the faces. They learn who drinks too fast, who talks too much, who attracts the wrong kind of attention. They remember everything, because forgetting is dangerous. They do not advertise. They do not recruit. Customers find them slowly, through trust passed hand to hand. A regular brings a friend. The friend proves themselves patient. The door opens. That is how these places grow, never quickly, never loudly. Money is handled carefully. Coins are taken without ceremony, slipped into aprons or pockets, never counted openly. There are no ledgers, no tallies. Everything is kept in the head, where the law cannot read it. Profits, when they come, are modest. Enough to pay rent, enough to keep food on the table, enough to make the risk feel justified, if never safe. Bribes are part of the calculation. Some constables expect them, others refuse them loudly and accept them quietly. The publican learns which is which. A few coins passed the right way can turn a raid into a warning, a charge into a delay. This does not make the publican powerful. It makes them tolerated, for now. Many are women. Widowhood is common. Death in Victorian London arrives early and often, especially for working men. When husbands die, licenses die with them. Respectable employment disappears just as quickly. An underground pub becomes a way to survive without surrendering children to workhouses or charity. These women know how to manage people. They know when to soften a voice and when to harden it. They are underestimated by the law and relied upon by everyone else. The publican is not merely a seller of drink. They are a gatekeeper, a mediator, sometimes a confessor. They hear stories no one tells above ground about hunger, cruelty, regret, rage. They listen without judgment because judgment drives customers away. In these rooms, neutrality is kindness. Violence is handled quietly. Fights are stopped early, before they draw attention. Drunks who cannot control themselves are cut off without explanation. Those who refuse to comply are removed quickly, firmly, without spectacle. The publican knows that chaos is contagious. One incident can end a place forever. Fear is constant, but it is controlled. The publican sleeps lightly. Every knock echoes long after it ends. Dreams are filled with footsteps on stairs that do not exist. Some keep clothes ready beside the bed, in case flight is necessary. Others prepare decoy rooms, decoy stories, decoy lives. No one expects permanence. And yet, night after night, they unlock the door. They light the lamps, they wipe the same tables, they pour the same harsh gin, because people keep coming, because the need does not disappear, because the city above has no room for what happens below. The law will never remember their names. Newspapers will never tell their stories honestly. Reformers will never ask why they took the risk. But without the unlicensed publican, the underground pub does not exist. Without them, the city loses one of its pressure valves, and the strain moves elsewhere to the street, the home, the body. They stand behind the bar, not out of defiance, but endurance. Quiet figures holding the line between survival and collapse, pouring secrecy by the glass, hoping always that tonight will end without a knock that changes everything. The first swallow is always a mistake. It scorches the throat, sears the tongue, tightens the chest. Eyes water, breath catches. For a brief, foolish moment, the drinker wonders why they came at all. Then the warmth arrives fast, unnatural, spreading downward like a lie that wants to be believed. In underground Victorian pubs, gin is not savoured, it is endured until it works. This is not the gin of polite society. There are no crystal bottles here, no measured pours, no assurance of purity. What fills these glasses is often cloudy, sharp, uneven. Distilled quickly, diluted carelessly, sometimes flavoured with sugar to make it passable, sometimes not flavoured at all. The taste varies from night to night because the source varies: grain, gin, potato spirit, whatever could be produced cheaply and sold quietly. Adulteration is common, dangerous. Turpentine for bite, sugar of lead for sweetness, juniper oil to suggest authenticity. No one asks too many questions. Asking implies choice, and choice is a luxury underground drinkers do not possess. The goal is effect, not refinement, to dull pain, to quiet thought, to make the hours pass more gently than they would sober. Many call it medicine, and not always ironically. Gin is taken for cold, for hunger, for grief, for exhaustion. A woman drinks it to still her shaking hands after 14 hours at a sewing table. A man drinks it to forget the dock accident that killed his friend and nearly took his leg. Someone else drinks because silence upstairs is worse than intoxication below. The burn becomes familiar, even welcome. Regulars learn to swallow quickly, bypassing the tongue as much as possible. Others chase the spirit with smoke, coughing deliberately to distract the body from what it has just accepted. Glasses are small, refilled often. There is no pretense of moderation, only of control. Children know the smell before they know the name. In some families, gin is present long before adulthood, a drop on the gums for teething, a spoonful to induce sleep. No one records these moments, no one counts the cost. In a city where medical care is scarce and suffering is constant, anything that works becomes acceptable. Doctors speak against it publicly and prescribe it privately. Gin appears in medical texts as stimulant, sedative, appetite aid. The contradiction is never resolved. The same society that condemns drunkenness relies on alcohol to patch wounds it refuses to treat properly. Underground pubs understand this hypocrisy instinctively. They sell what the city demands while pretending not to. Overindulgence is common and quietly managed. A drinker who collapses is moved to a corner. Someone loosens a collar. Someone else watches the door. There is no outrage, only routine. Deaths happen too, sometimes from poisoning, sometimes from excess, sometimes from bodies that simply cannot bear another night of chemical relief. These deaths rarely travel upward into records. They remain underground, like everything else. The gin does not taste good. No one pretends it does. What it tastes like is absence, the absence of hunger for an hour. the absence of memory for a night, the absence of dread long enough to breathe. For many, that is worth the burn, worth the risk, worth the slow damage accumulating unnoticed. Victorian reformers speak of gin as moral failure. They draw caricatures of bloated faces and ruined homes. But underground pubs tell a different story, one of desperation dressed as vice, of medicine administered without consent by circumstance itself. Each glass passed across the table carries more than alcohol. It carries the weight of a city that needs its people functional but not cared for, alive but not comfortable, sober in theory but numbed in practice. The gin burns because it must, because it has work to do. They learn to watch without appearing to look. Behind the bar, if it can be called that, often no more than a plank laid across barrels or a scarred table, women stand at the center of the underground pub's quiet machinery. They pour, they listen, they calculate risk in glances and pauses. Their presence is so ordinary it becomes invisible, which is precisely why it works. Many arrive here by erosion, not choice. A husband lost to the docks, the factory, the bottle, a license revoked with his death, rent still due, children still hungry. Respectable work for women is scarce and poorly paid, and charity carries its own humiliations. Running an underground pub is dangerous, but it is also practical. It keeps the family together. It keeps the door closed to the workhouse. They are not barkeeps in the theatrical sense. There is no showmanship, no raised voice. Service is efficient, almost gentle. They remember who drinks slowly and who does not. They notice the tremor in a hand that means grief, the restless shifting that means trouble. They intervene before a man embarrasses himself, before an argument sharpens into something that draws attention. Authority here is quiet. A look is often enough. A hand placed briefly on the rim of a glass signals it will not be refilled. A subtle shake of the head ends a conversation before it spills. Men who would never take instruction above ground learn quickly to accept it here, not because they are cowed, but because the woman behind the bar understands the room better than anyone else. These women hear everything. Confessions arrive uninvited, loosened by gin and the dim safety of smoke. Stories of violence, of hunger, of betrayal, of shame. The publican listens without comment, because comment creates obligation, and obligation creates risk. Silence is not indifference, it is protection. What is said below stays below. Some women work alongside daughters, sisters, mothers. Skills are passed quietly: how to pour without spilling, how to spot a constable pretending to be drunk, how to end a night early when something feels wrong. Children grow up learning caution before they learn letters. They understand secrecy as instinct. Others work alone, by design. A single woman draws less attention. She is underestimated by patrons and police alike. The law expects criminality to wear a male face. This blindness becomes shelter. A woman can close a door without suspicion, claim ignorance convincingly, cry when necessary. Survival demands flexibility, not pride. Danger remains constant. Harassment is common, handled swiftly. A man who forgets himself is corrected publicly and decisively. The room backs the woman behind the bar because stability depends on her. Without her, there is no pub, only chaos, and chaos invites the law. When raids happen, women often take the blame. They are arrested while men scatter. They pay fines that erase months of work. Some serve short sentences, returning thinner, quieter, but not defeated. The pub may move, it may close temporarily, it may reopen somewhere else. Adaptation is learned early. Reformers speak of these women with particular venom. They are accused of corrupting men, of tempting weakness, of poisoning families. Rarely are they asked how they came to stand behind that bar in the first place. The narrative prefers villains to circumstances, but underground pubs do not function without them. They are the memory of the place, the stabilizing force, the reason the room does not tip into violence or panic. They balance hospitality with suspicion, care with distance. At night's end, they clean quietly, wipe tables, hide bottles, count coins without ceremony. Upstairs, they return to roles that do not acknowledge what they have just accomplished. Mothers, widows, seamstresses, invisible again. By morning, no sign remains. Yet night after night, when the city's weight becomes too much and the door must open cautiously, it is often a woman who opens it, measured, watchful, steady, holding the underground together with practiced restraint and unspoken resolve. He arrives alone, or appears to. A clean coat, polished boots, a hat worn correctly, not nervously. Nothing about him announces desperation. Above ground, he passes without comment, one more clerk, one more shop assistant, one more man who knows how to keep his head down and his voice measured. He belongs to the city that pretends to function. Then he turns the corner. He pauses, and he knocks. Respectability is the finest disguise in Victorian London, and underground pubs depend on it more than any false wall or hidden stair. The respectable drinker is not an exception. He is a pattern. He arrives after hours spent obeying rules that offer no comfort in return. He arrives with his collar still stiff, his manners intact, his need carefully folded inside. He does not want to be seen here. For the poor, drinking underground is necessity. For the respectable, it is risk. Their livelihoods depend on appearances, on being sober, disciplined, reliable. They cannot be found in public gin shops. They cannot stagger home visibly altered, and yet they drink because restraint without relief curdles into something worse. Below ground, they loosen. Not immediately. They sit first. Observe. Take small sips. They do not slouch or laugh loudly. They speak politely to the woman behind the bar, as if courtesy might protect them. But the gin works quickly, and soon their shoulders drop. Their voices lower not from caution, but from relief. Here, they are not overseers or subordinates. They are not fathers failing expectations or husbands trapped by arithmetic. They are simply men drinking in the dark. Some wear disguises deliberately. A scarf pulled higher, a hat kept low, a coat swapped for an older one before descending, not to fool those inside. The regulars know better, but to reassure themselves, as if clothing could create a boundary between the man upstairs and the one swallowing gin below. Others rely on silence alone. They sit in corners, away from lamps, choosing seats that keep faces obscured. They do not share names. They avoid conversation unless spoken to first. If they recognize someone from daylight, a co-worker, a neighbor, they pretend not to. Mutual ignorance becomes courtesy. Class boundaries blur underground, but they do not vanish. The respectable drinker listens more than he speaks. He is careful not to offend those whose lives are harder than his own. He knows he is borrowing space, not owning it. He does not complain about the gin. He does not ask questions. Gratitude is his payment for anonymity. And yet, something dangerous happens here. The respectable drinker discovers that his need is no less than anyone else's. That exhaustion is democratic. That despair does not ask for income or education before arriving. This realization unsettles him. It threatens the careful hierarchy he has built his life upon. Sometimes he drinks more because of it. Stories spill out about ledgers that never balance, employers who promise advancement and deliver nothing, marriages maintained by routine rather than affection. Above ground, these confessions would be unthinkable. Below, they dissolve into smoke and shared silence. The underground pub becomes a pressure chamber. It allows respectability to survive by giving it somewhere to collapse privately. Without these spaces, many would break publicly, and public failure is unforgivable in Victorian society. The hidden pub does not corrupt respectability. It preserves it. This is the city's quiet hypocrisy. Victorian London demands sobriety as proof of worth. while constructing a world that requires chemical relief to endure. The respectable drinker understands this instinctively, even if he never articulates it. He drinks underground not because he is weak, but because he is compliant, and compliance has a cost. When he leaves, he restores himself, collar straightened, hat adjusted, expression neutral. He ascends the stairs and re-enters the city as if nothing has happened. Tomorrow he will judge drunkenness publicly. He will nod approvingly at temperance pamphlets. He will deny, even to himself, that he was ever below. But the underground remembers. It remembers his knock, his careful silence, his relief when the door closed behind him. Respectability may be the mask Victorian London prefers, but beneath it, the city drinks just as deeply, only more carefully, and with far more to lose. Below the street, voices gather where power does not listen. The underground pub is not only a place to drink, it is a place to speak carefully, quietly, without record. In a city where the poor are discussed endlessly but rarely heard, these hidden rooms become something like a parliament, not of laws or votes, but of grievances, rumours, and truths that cannot survive daylight. Here, words carry weight. A dockworker leans close and speaks of wages cut again without explanation. A seamstress describes fingers stiff with cold, paid by the piece, discarded when the eyes fail. A clerk whispers about a supervisor skimming from the till while preaching thrift to subordinates. None of this will appear in newspapers. None of it will reach Parliament proper. But it is spoken here, passed from mouth to ear, validated by nods and shared experience. Gin loosens tongues, but fear sharpens them. People learn how to say just enough. Names are avoided, places are hinted at, not specified. Everyone understands the danger of too much clarity. Still, the act of speaking itself matters. To name injustice, even obliquely, is to resist the silence imposed above ground. Politics arrive disguised as gossip. Talk of new laws filters down distorted, incomplete. Someone heard that licenses will be tightened again. Someone else claims a raid is planned nearby. Whether true or not, these rumors shape behavior. Doors close earlier. Routes change. A pub relocates before the law even moves. Information, however unreliable, becomes a survival tool. These conversations are not revolutionary in the grand sense. There are no manifestos here, no speeches meant to stir crowds. What happens instead is smaller and more dangerous. It humanizes suffering. It reveals patterns. It teaches people they are not alone in being ground down. Anger exists, but it is restrained. Open rage attracts attention. It also exhausts those who must return to work tomorrow. Instead, resentment simmers, shared in fragments. A bitter laugh, a phrase repeated across nights. The sense that the system is not merely harsh, but indifferent. This realization bonds people more tightly than ideology ever could. The underground pub also becomes a place of negotiation. Work is discussed, opportunities exchanged quietly. A man hears of a job at the docks. A woman learns which factory is hiring before dawn. These are not favors granted by power, but scraps passed laterally among those who have none. Survival networks form without names or leadership. The publican listens closely. They hear tensions before they erupt. They intervene when talk turns reckless. A single loose mouth can destroy a place. Parliament above ground thrives on recorded speech. This parliament survives on discretion. Women's voices matter here in ways they do not elsewhere. Above ground, they are instructed, corrected, ignored. Below, they speak freely about wages, about abuse, about exhaustion that polite society refuses to acknowledge. Their testimony carries authority because it is lived, not theorized. Occasionally, ideas surface that frighten even the speakers. Talk of unions, of strikes, of refusing work that destroys bodies for pennies. These thoughts are tested gently, floated like smoke, gauged by reaction. Most drift away unacted upon, not because they are wrong, but because the cost is too high. Hunger is persuasive. Responsibility is heavy. Still, something shifts. Night after night, the same truths surface from different mouths. Patterns emerge. The city upstairs may pretend its order is natural and just, but below, a different understanding takes shape. That suffering is systemic. That blame has been misplaced. That obedience has limits. No resolutions are passed, no reforms enacted. But something quieter happens. People leave less alone than they arrived. Their pain has been witnessed. Their anger has been shared. Their reality has been spoken aloud in a world determined to deny it. When they ascend back into Victorian London, they return to silence and submission. But they carry something with them now, a sense that the city's grand speeches are incomplete, that real life happens elsewhere. In these underground rooms, the poor do not rule. But for a few hours, they are heard. For a moment, the city forgets itself. A tune drifts through the smoke, soft at first, then bolder as confidence grows. Someone hums. Someone else taps a foot against stone. In some underground pubs, a fiddle appears from beneath a bench, its wood scarred and poorly tuned but willing. A song begins, half-remembered, stitched together from verses learned in childhood and altered by adulthood's disappointments. Music is dangerous down here, and that is precisely why it matters. Laughter follows the music quickly, rising in short bursts, quickly checked. No one laughs freely for long. Every sound is measured against the walls, weighed against the ceiling, imagined echoing up through floorboards into a world that must not hear it. Joy exists, but it exists cautiously. For these brief stretches, the underground pub feels almost ordinary. Faces loosen, shoulders relax, people lean closer, the gin seems warmer. Stories turn lighter, tales exaggerated just enough to amuse, just enough to escape truth without abandoning it entirely. Someone mocks a foreman, someone recalls a ridiculous customer, someone dares to hope out loud, briefly, before retreating into humor. These moments are fragile. They rely on a shared illusion that nothing will interrupt them, that the door will remain closed, that the night will proceed as planned. Everyone participates in maintaining this illusion, because breaking it too soon makes the return to fear unbearable. But fear is never far. A chair scrapes too loudly. Someone coughs unexpectedly. A floorboard above creaks. The music falters, laughter thins, heads turn in unison toward the door. For a heartbeat, no one moves. The silence that follows is heavier than the noise that preceded it, a sudden, collective stillness sharpened by memory. Every regular knows this silence. It is the silence that follows footsteps overhead, the silence that waits to hear if those footsteps pass or pause, the silence that remembers raids, arrests, and nights that ended badly. Someone nearest the door rises slowly, not drawing attention, the publican's hands still. The musician lowers the instrument, but does not put it away, as if doing so would acknowledge fear too openly. Glasses remain untouched. Then sometimes nothing happens. The footsteps fade. The creak resolves into ordinary movement above. The city continues its business, unaware of the breath it has just stolen from below. Gradually, cautiously, the room exhales. The music resumes, softer now. Laughter returns, quieter, edged with relief. Other times, the interruption is real. A knock that does not follow the pattern. Voices too clear, too authoritative. The unmistakable sound of boots on stone stairs. In those moments, music dies instantly. Laughter disappears, as if it never existed. People move without speaking, each knowing their role. Bottles are hidden, lamps dimmed, false walls engaged. Some slip into passageways, others remain, resigned, understanding that not everyone escapes every time. The transformation is astonishing in its speed. A room alive with sound becomes a chamber of shadows in seconds. The contrast is violent, jarring, a reminder that joy underground is always borrowed, never owned. Yet the music keeps returning. Night after night, someone risks humming again. Someone risks laughter. Someone brings a fiddle back downstairs. Because without these moments, the underground pub would be nothing more than a place of endurance. Music transforms it, briefly, into a place of humanity. Victorian London above ground prides itself on orchestras, concerts, halls filled with sanctioned sound. Below ground, music is smaller, rougher, more dangerous and more honest. It belongs to those who have little else that does. Laughter here is not ignorance. It is defiance. Even knowing how quickly silence can fall, people choose to laugh anyway. They choose to sing. They choose to risk joy in a world determined to ration it. And when the silence comes, as it always does, it carries the echo of what was almost allowed to last. The law knows. It pretends not to, but it knows. Victorian London is too dense, too loud, too full of smoke and rumour for anything to remain truly hidden for long. Constables hear things. Landlords notice traffic at odd hours. Neighbours complain selectively. The underground pub survives not because it is invisible, but because it exists in the space between enforcement and indifference. That space is expensive. A policeman's wage is thin, stretched across rent, food, boots, family. Moral certainty does not pay for coal. When an envelope appears, folded small and passed without ceremony, it is not understood as a bribe so much as an adjustment, a way to restore balance, a way to ensure that tonight's patrol takes a slightly different route. Payoffs are quiet, transactional, and never discussed. The publican knows how much a blind eye costs in a given district. The price fluctuates higher after a raid, lower after a quiet month. Some officers demand regular payment. Others accept it once and expect nothing more. A few refuse outright, loudly and publicly, only to soften later when reality presses harder. Corruption is not uniform. It is personal. Some policemen see underground pubs as a necessary evil. They drink there themselves, out of uniform, known and tolerated. Others despise them as symbols of disorder and moral decay. These are the dangerous ones, the ambitious, the righteous, the ones who believe enforcement is a ladder upward. The publican learns to read faces as carefully as knocks. A constable who asks questions too politely is suspicious. One who jokes too freely is worse. The safest are those who say little, accept payment without comment, and move on. The most unpredictable are the ones who insist they are doing their duty. Duty has consequences. Blind eyes are not always bought. Sometimes they are chosen. An officer looks the other way because the alternative is more trouble than it's worth. A raid requires paperwork, witnesses, time. It invites scrutiny from superiors who may ask why the pub existed undisturbed for so long. Silence preserves careers as effectively as money. Above ground, the police present themselves as guardians of order. Below, they are negotiators. Raids happen when tolerance ends, when someone complains loudly enough, when a reformer applies pressure, when a public example is required. These raids are rarely surprises. Word travels downward faster than authority. A pub that is truly unprepared has already failed. When the law descends the stairs, it does so theatrically. Boots heavy, voices raised, authority announced for effect. Bottles are seized, benches overturned, names demanded. The spectacle matters. It reassures the city above that control exists. But even during these moments, discretion persists. Not everyone is arrested. Not every charge is pursued. The line between justice and performance remains thin. Some officers regret what they do. They see the faces in the cellar tired, resigned, familiar. They recognize neighbors, cousins, sometimes themselves. Enforcement becomes a form of selective amnesia. What happens below is easier to punish than to solve. Reformers never understand this. They imagine the law as a blade, clean and decisive. They do not see the hands that must hold it, the compromises required to keep the city functioning. They demand purity from a system built on survival. And so the underground pub continues, balanced precariously between payment and patience, between visibility and denial. Its existence depends not on lawlessness, but on inconsistency, on the city's inability to fully commit to its own rules. The blind eye is not absence of sight, it is choice. A choice made nightly by those tasked with enforcing order in a city that quietly requires disorder to endure. The footsteps come first, not the orderly march of a constable's patrol, but the hurried, uneven thump of boots on cobblestone above, echoing faintly down stairwells and through gaps in floorboards. The underground pub, alive with murmured conversation and the soft scrape of chairs, holds its breath. Every head lifts, every hand tightens around a glass, every glance drifts toward the door. Raids were never polite. They arrived unannounced, often in the dead hours when vigilance is thinnest. A single officer, or a pair, occasionally a squad, descending with authority and purpose, intent on proving the law's reach. Some carried lanterns, their light harsh, slicing through smoke like knives. Others relied on surprise alone, trusting the echo of boots to carry their presence before a knock ever reached the threshold. The knock, when it comes, is decisive. A sharp rap, a pause, silence. A door creaks. The room reacts as one organism. Eyes flick to exits, shoulders stiffen. Even the bravest drinker pauses mid-sip, suddenly aware of every breath they've taken in the last hour. For the unlicensed publican, the knock is both threat and signal. Every raid has its rhythm, and survival depends on understanding it instantly. Preparation is instinct. Candles are dimmed or hidden behind barrels. Bottles are slipped beneath false floors. Benches, tables, and chairs are shifted to block sightlines or create obstacles. Some regulars, who know the drill, retreat into corners or secret passageways. Others hold still, pretending the room has always been empty. The smallest sound, a cough, a glass scraping, carries disproportionate weight, and it is controlled with deliberate restraint. Violence is a possibility. The law is patient in theory but impatient in practice. If doors are not opened promptly, if questions are deflected too long, if compliance is incomplete, enforcement becomes physical. A shove, a strike, a thrown bottle. Yet, violence is often minimized by those who know the game. Bribes or whispered words can avert escalation. Fear alone ensures cooperation. The cellar is a place of negotiation as much as punishment. Escape routes are planned, practiced, and prayed over. Narrow stairs, hidden doors, escape into neighboring basements or alleys. In some cases, tunnels, old remnants of forgotten construction, offer temporary sanctuary. Knowledge of these routes is carefully shared among regulars. A newcomer, unaware of the paths, is dangerous to all. The raid, unpredictable though it may be, is countered by preparation, discipline, and a keen understanding of the building itself. The psychological toll is immense. Even when a raid passes without incident, the memory lingers. Patrons remember the lantern's glare, the officer's voice, the way their breath caught in anticipation of discovery. Fear becomes habitual, sharpening senses, shortening patience, heightening awareness. The underground pub, once a refuge, becomes a theater of constant vigilance, each night replaying the risk of exposure. Yet raids do not end the trade. Even when a publican is fined, imprisoned briefly, or threatened, the pub reopens. Patrons return. Smoke and laughter resume, measured and cautious, but resilient. The raids shape behavior. They teach discretion, timing, silence, but they do not eliminate need. The city above may believe it asserts control, but below ground, life continues, adapted, persistent. In these moments, the underground proves its strength. It survives not through force, but through knowledge, preparation, and community. Through silent communication, shared understanding, and the quiet defiance of those who pour gin and those who drink it. Raids may arrive in the night, but the pub has already anticipated them, softened them, survived them. And when the boots retreat, when the lanterns vanish back up the stairs, the room exhales. Music resumes, conversations resume, laughter returns, quieter, more deliberate. The city above sleeps, unaware of the drama that just passed below. And the underground continues, ever ready for the next knock in the night. The law is patient only in theory. A single arrest can ripple through an entire neighborhood, leaving consequences far heavier than the crime itself. For those caught in the act of running or even drinking in an underground pub, punishment is immediate, public, and often disproportionate. The courtrooms of Victorian London, with their polished wood and severe benches, function as stages where failure is performed, scrutinized, and remembered. A publican's life can collapse in hours. A fine might be enough to erase months of painstaking labor. Earnings vanish like smoke in the night, swallowed by the weight of penalties and costs of legal representation. Imprisonment adds another burden: loss of income, neglect of family, exposure to disease in crowded cells, humiliation carried home afterward. A small misstep can compound quickly, making survival nearly impossible. Patrons fare no better. Even casual drinkers are swept into the judicial machinery. The respectable clerk who sought a discreet sip may find himself branded as immoral, subject to fines or public warning. The poor laborer, dependent on after-hours indulgence for warmth and numbness, risks far more. Wages docked, work threatened, reputation tarnished before peers. In Victorian London, reputation is currency, sometimes more valuable than coin. Loss of face often endures long after fines are paid. Prison is a world apart. The cells smell of damp, human waste, and despair. Light is minimal, shadows thick, and the hours stretch like a slow, cruel ribbon. Disease stalks every corner: typhus, cholera, influenza. Guards are indifferent, often cruel. Meals are meager and unappealing, designed to sustain but not nourish. For women, the risk is compounded. Vulnerability to harassment, neglect, and loss of children to workhouses while detained. Families pay silently. Children miss meals, mothers toil harder, and older siblings take on work that should not be theirs. A father imprisoned for selling or drinking gin leaves a household teetering on the edge of ruin. A widow caught serving spirits faces judgment, not only from the law but from neighbors and relatives who see only shame. The underground pub, intended as refuge, becomes an origin of further hardship. The psychological weight is heavy. Fear seeps into every corner of life. Patrons adjust behavior in anticipation of raids, arrests, fines, voices drop, laughter is muted. Even the bravest publican calculates constantly how much gin is too much tonight, how loud is too loud, how many coins to set aside for mercy, how long to risk a knock. The burden is never removed, only deferred. Yet resilience persists. Despite the cost, these pubs reopen. Patrons return. The city's need does not diminish, even under threat of law. Each reopened pub is a quiet act of defiance and survival, a statement that the poor and desperate will not vanish simply because punishment looms. Mistakes are costly, but the alternative: silence, hunger, exposure is worse. Fines, prisons, and ruin shape behavior, but they do not erase the underground. They create a rhythm of tension, an awareness of risk that becomes part of the culture. Regulars learn to move quietly, speak softly, and watch one another. They anticipate raids, plan exits, and ration exposure. Even despair is managed, measured, and shared with care. The law may punish, but it cannot completely suppress need. In the end, the city above believes it enforces order. But below, the underground continues, scarred but persistent. The fear of prison and fines shapes the night, but it does not conquer it. Lives may be ruined, fortunes lost, bodies weakened, and reputations tarnished. Yet the cellars remain open, the gin still burns, and the hidden city endures, quietly teaching London the limits of its authority. The night folds differently for those who drink underground. Gin burns like a confession, raw and immediate, leaving warmth in its wake but not relief. Those who descend into the cellars know its effect. The first sip sharpens pain, the second dulls thought, the third blurs the edges of memory until the world above feels distant, almost unreal. But gin alone cannot answer everything. For some, a second escape is necessary, a chemical silence more profound, more deliberate. Ether. Ether is lighter, yet heavier in effect. Gin drags the body. Ether lifts the mind. It carries the drinker into quietude, without the harsh burn of spirits, without the need to swallow courage by the glass. Taken in small, carefully measured inhalations, it steadies trembling hands, smooths frayed nerves, and quiets the relentless hum of fear. In the underground pub, the two are used together, not recklessly, but as tools, chosen depending on what a person wishes to escape, the body, the mind, or both. The gin drunk is visible. It bends the posture, reddens the eyes, colors the cheeks. It tells stories for the unwary, stories about suffering endured, hunger suppressed, grief disguised. It is noisy in its own way. Laughter arrives too loud, a hand knocks glasses across the table, a voice rises unexpectedly. Observation is constant. Regulars learn to read the gin drunk in an instant, where to guide them, when to intervene, when to let the chemical tide pass. Ether, by contrast, is subtle. A person inhaling ether seems almost apart, yet is fully present. Movements are slower, more deliberate. Speech, if it comes at all, is measured, soft, and cautious. The eyes do not wander, but they also do not focus sharply. They glide over surfaces, absorbing shapes and sounds without judgment. In smoke-filled cellars, the ether calm becomes nearly invisible. A man or woman can be sitting at a table, surrounded by others, yet already on a journey elsewhere. The combination is artful. Gin prepares the body for risk, dulls the immediate edge of hunger, cold, and despair. Ether prepares the mind, softens anxiety, and allows the drinker to endure the fear inherent in an underground pub, the knock, the raid, the unpredictable inspection of the law. Together, they create a temporary equilibrium. The world is sharp, threatening, and cold, but inside the body and mind, a false warmth, a fragile safety, persists. Not all understand the rhythm. A single misstep, too much gin before ether, or ether inhaled too deeply can produce collapse. A cough, a stumble, an eye too bright can draw attention, provoke suspicion, or worse. The skilled regulars know their limits, passing advice quietly. 2 sips, then a whiff, or hold it, wait for the nod. Survival depends on mastery of both body and chemical. The effects shape community. Regulars who share this knowledge are bonded. Those who do not are watched carefully. Gin and ether do more than dull. They teach observation, patience, and trust. They also heighten fear in a controlled way. One never forgets how thin the line is between safety and discovery, calm and chaos, warmth and injury. Above ground, Victorian society condemns both. Gin is sin, ether is indulgence, and the people who use them are marked as weak or corrupt. Below, the two are tools, medicine for the city-weary, instruments of survival, a temporary reprieve from hardship that cannot be escaped otherwise. The underground pub becomes a laboratory of endurance, where chemical, calm and spirited burn coexist, calibrated nightly, preserving life in its own shadowed, flickering way. The underground pub is rarely a single purpose. It is a room, a cellar, a hidden chamber, but also a sanctuary. For some, it is warmth in winter, bread in scarcity, laughter in monotony. For others, it is survival, an invisible line between danger above and relative safety below. Among those who depend on it most are women whose work, above ground, is considered shameful, prostitutes, courtesans, and fallen ladies. Here, in the dim corners and behind false walls, they find something like refuge. Safety in these rooms is conditional. There are no locks that will hold forever, no laws that guarantee protection. Yet, the very structure of the underground pub, the narrow staircases, the smoke, the low light, the hidden exits, offers temporary sanctuary. The publican, often a woman herself, understands instinctively how to create a buffer between danger and those who cannot defend themselves. Seating is arranged to minimize exposure. The most vulnerable are positioned nearest exits or behind barriers that appear solid but slide silently to conceal them. Survival is a matter of geometry, timing, and discretion. The women navigate multiple roles at once. They are clients, patrons, and sometimes informal staff. Some bring their own drink to share, others barter services for protection or information. They watch the room carefully, scanning for threats, an officer who lingers too long, a man who seems too interested in details, a stranger whose knock or glance carries suspicion. Every interaction is measured, every word is deliberate. Silence is often their greatest defense. Even among themselves, trust is careful. The underground pub is not a home, it is shared space, borrowed for hours or a single night. Alliances form and dissolve quickly, based on observation and necessity rather than loyalty. A woman may confide in another if she judges her safe, or remain silent, weighing risk against need. Knowledge of who can be trusted becomes currency. Mistake is costly, sometimes fatal, not physically, but socially. Exposure can lead to ruin in the streets above. The combination of drink, smoke, and low light creates ambiguity. Faces blur in the haze, movements are softened, conversations fragment. In this way, the pub offers not only physical shelter, but social camouflage. A woman sitting quietly at a corner table may appear merely as another customer, another worker, another shadow among shadows. The law, the public, and even rivals are often unable to distinguish her role, even when close enough to see. Raids still happen, but the structure provides options. Exit routes are memorized, false walls are rehearsed, bottles and evidence of illicit trade are hidden swiftly. The women know how to slip away unnoticed, how to avoid scrutiny, how to survive the moment without bringing ruin to others in the room. Escape is never guaranteed, but it is always possible if skill, timing, and luck align. The presence of these women changes the character of the space. They carry their own stories of survival, loss, cunning, and resilience. Their laughter, their whispered warnings, their quiet defiance, all shape the rhythm of the pub. Patrons adjust behavior instinctively, respecting boundaries, responding to subtle cues. The room becomes a delicate ecosystem, balanced on fear, necessity, and mutual understanding. Above ground, Victorian society condemns them. It labels them morally corrupt, socially dangerous, criminal. Below, the underground pub gives them a voice, a place to breathe, a few hours of autonomy and safety. These women are not merely surviving, they are asserting quiet sovereignty in a world that refuses to acknowledge their presence. For the hours that the door remains closed, they are untouchable, untamed, and, in a small but vital sense, free. The underground pub is never entirely safe. Beneath the streets of Victorian London, where walls sweat damp and smoke hangs in the corners like memory, violence waits quietly. It is not the public, sanctioned aggression of courts or constables. It is personal, immediate, and unrecorded. Here, a fist can strike, a bottle can fly, a knife can gleam without leaving a trace in the newspapers. There are no witnesses, except those who choose silence or are forced into it. Violence begins quietly. A misstep, a careless word, a drink spilled across a table. Tension is as thick as the smoke overhead, and one spark is enough to ignite it. Hands tighten around glasses and fists alike. Eyes flash. Shoulders stiffen. The room contracts as instinct replaces reason. The unlicensed publican, ever vigilant, observes, positioning bodies, guiding energy, containing the surge before it erupts. Fights are disciplined affairs, brief but intense. There is no glory here, no audience, except the few who cannot leave. Chairs and tables become shields and barriers. Bottles become instruments of warning rather than leisure. The combatants know the rules. Aggression must be swift, targeted, and contained. Injure someone unnecessarily, and the law may arrive, or the crowd may turn. Skill lies in making the violence disappear as quickly as it appeared. Drunkenness amplifies danger. Gin, ether, and laudanum dull judgment even as they sharpen courage. A man who feels wronged perceives insults that do not exist. A woman slighted imagines conspiracies. Arguments escalate in seconds, but the underground smoke and darkness transform them. Movements are obscured, faces are shadowed. Memory of the event is already unreliable before it ends. The publican is mediator, enforcer, and observer. A subtle glance, a hand on a shoulder, a low voice, these often halt escalation before fists are thrown. Patrons learn to read these cues instinctively. The woman behind the bar becomes both judge and jury, her decisions carried out silently, without argument, without delay. Respect is earned quickly, disobedience is dangerous. A single misjudgment can ruin the night for everyone. Silence arrives like a tide. After the initial burst, the room holds its breath. Conversations cease, eyes dart, hands unclench reluctantly. Every participant understands that someone outside may be listening. A misstep could bring ruin, but even if it does not, the psychological cost is heavy. The memory of what just occurred hangs in the air as heavily as smoke, thick and suffocating. Bodies heal, but reputations endure. Victorian society would never hear of these incidents. Reformers would claim morality is intact. The law would shrug, yet those inside remember. Names, gestures, alliances, and grudges are recorded mentally, passed quietly to friends and enemies alike. These unobserved skirmishes create hierarchies of influence and fear, quietly shaping the underground pub's social architecture. Deaths are rare, but not impossible. A knife left unattended, a bottle wielded too forcefully, a misjudged step on a damp floor each is a potential tragedy. When someone falls, the publican acts swiftly, conceal, move, calm. The body is hidden or removed if possible. Witnesses are silenced by necessity. The law above will never know, and the world above will never mourn. Life here continues, just a little more cautious. Violence is part of the rhythm of the underground. It is the unspoken pulse beneath laughter, music, and smoke. It reminds everyone of fragility, of the necessity for vigilance, and of the cost of recklessness. Yet it also binds the community together. In surviving it, patrons and publicans alike prove their resilience, their resourcefulness, and their ability to endure a world that refuses to recognize their existence. In this shadowed city, violence exists not for spectacle, but as truth. It is raw, fleeting, unrecorded, and yet deeply formative. In the underground pub, Everyone learns that safety is never given, only earned, and that the shadows protect only those who respect their rules. Odor is subtle, but it never lies. In the underground pubs of Victorian London, scent is as much a presence as the walls, the smoke, or the flickering gaslight. The smell of gin, sharp and botanical, hangs in corners, clings to clothing, and drifts upward through cracks in floorboards and stairs. It is a signal, a whisper of life, a trace of habit. And while it comforts those who seek it, it betrays them to those who watch. The city above is attentive in its own way. Landlords know when basements are more than storage. Neighbours notice when windows fog with more than breath. Constables and reformers sniff the air, literally and figuratively, for evidence of vice. Gin alone might be denied, but combined with sweat, smoke, and human activity, it becomes a signature. A city built on surveillance, even passive, inattentive, bureaucratic, catches the hint. Smell travels faster than sound in tight, humid corridors. The publican fights it constantly. Lemon, vinegar, and old sawdust mask what cannot be hidden. Tobacco smoke thickens the air deliberately, offering a haze not only for vision but for olfactory deception. Coal fires are stoked to produce odors ordinary to the city above. Every breath is calculated. Every placement of barrel, bench, and fire is considered in relation to how scent will circulate. It is architecture applied to survival. Patrons adjust instinctively. Hands are washed in buckets of water before handling coins. Clothing is rotated, dampened, or layered to trap odors. Pipes and cigars are used strategically, a puff here, a match there, masking the gin's sharpness with something else, something more mundane. Some patrons arrive with outer coats that never touch the interior air. A careful step, a lowered voice, a suppressed cough, each prevents a fragrance from wandering too far. Survival is a choreography of smell as much as of movement. Even nature conspires, occasionally, to betray. Rain washes streets and alleys above, but dampens the air below, intensifying scents that would otherwise disperse. Heat from stoves or fires draws odors upward, carrying them through the building's bones into rooms and corridors that are not part of the pub. A careless landlord, an inattentive neighbor, a gust of wind through a basement window, these minor events can expose the hidden activity beneath. When the smell gives them away, consequences follow. A sudden knock, a visit from authorities, a complaint whispered to a reformer. Even if the raid is avoided, the warning suffices. Regulars watch their breath. Glasses are hidden. Walls seem to shrink as the familiar aromas become incriminating evidence. The publican recalibrates. A new layer of masking, a change in routine, a shift in ventilation. Every response is learned, tested, and memorized. The psychological weight is enormous. Patrons live constantly aware that something as invisible, intangible, and natural as scent can undo all precautions. They drink, laugh, smoke, and move in patterns honed by fear. Every inhale is a negotiation with danger. Every exhale a reminder that exposure is not a matter of guilt, but of circumstance. Smell becomes a language, and everyone here reads it. Yet life continues despite the risk. The underground pub persists because the need outweighs the fear. People still descend. Gin is still poured. Ether is still inhaled. Music, laughter, and whispered conversation fill the corners. Smell is managed, concealed, and endured. The risk is constant, but it is accepted, because above ground, life is far harsher than below, where one can at least breathe in semi-private, if only cautiously. In the end, scent is both ally and enemy. It tells the body that gin has worked, that smoke masks, that safety exists, yet it betrays in an instant, turning ordinary routine into peril. In Victorian London's underground pubs, the smell that gives them away is also the reminder that survival is never absolute, that vigilance is endless, and that every sense is a weapon in the quiet war beneath the streets. Heat comes first, sudden and unwelcome, a betrayal in the darkness. In underground pubs of Victorian London, fire is never merely warmth. Candles sputter, lanterns flare, coal embers jump from hearths, and every element capable of ignition carries menace. The cellars are narrow, enclosed, and crowded. Walls and ceilings sweat with damp, and smoke hangs thick. In such a space, even a spark can become a roar, and every patron knows it. The danger is both physical and psychological. A misplaced candle sets the tablecloth alight. A knocked-over lantern sends alcohol spilling onto wooden floors. Ether and gin, ever-present companions, make the room volatile, amplifying even the smallest lapse in attention. Flames travel faster than sound in confined air. Panic moves faster than thought. One instant of carelessness can transform refuge into death trap. Preparation is instinctive. Publicans learn early to arrange furniture to allow quick passage. Barrels of spirits are stacked away from heat sources. Candles are shielded with metal or glass, placed strategically to illuminate but not in danger. Mats and rugs are kept minimal, treated with damp cloths, or abandoned altogether. Even clothing choices among patrons reflect awareness. Long, flowing coats and skirts become liability in the flicker of flames, and those who know the room move lightly, deliberately. Alcohol multiplies risk. Gin, ether, and laudanum all act as accelerants. Spills go unnoticed in the dim light, only to react with stray sparks. The very substances that allow the patrons temporary relief, heat in their bodies, numbness in their minds, also create peril. The same glass that brings courage can become a weapon, a conduit for disaster. Every breath, every sip, every careless gesture is weighted with consequence. The cellars themselves are silent accomplices and hidden threats. Low ceilings amplify heat. Narrow passages hinder evacuation. False walls and secret compartments, designed for safety and concealment, can trap flames or collapse in panic. The architecture that protects also confines. Those who know the exits intimately have advantage, but even the skilled can misjudge smoke density or heat travel. A corridor that seemed safe one night can become a corridor of suffocation the next. Patrons develop reflexes. A subtle cough alerts others. A hand on the shoulder guides away from danger. Candles are snuffed without announcement. Bottles are tipped carefully onto stone floors, where they will not ignite before spills can spread. The room operates as organism, every individual attuned to hazard, every movement calculated to prevent catastrophe. Panic is contagious, but so is calm when everyone understands the signals. When fire does erupt, escape is chaotic yet disciplined. False walls swing, hidden stairways provide egress, and those who know the layout shepherd the unwary. Shouts are minimized, movement is precise. Outside, the city above may hear nothing, or may see only smoke curling faintly from a window. Below, hearts race and lungs burn as people scramble through familiar corridors, now transformed into gauntlets. And yet, life continues. After flames are extinguished, after the heat subsides, the patrons return. Candles are relit, barrels are restacked, the publican counts losses and adjusts routines. Gin is poured again. Music resumes, laughter cautiously returns. The fire becomes another lesson etched into memory, a reminder that survival is fragile, that the underground pub is both sanctuary and hazard, and that vigilance is endless. Fire, like smoke, like law, is a constant companion. It threatens, illuminates, and teaches. It reminds everyone below ground that the pleasures of the night are temporary, earned, and dangerous. In Victorian London, the heat that rises from a cellar is more than flame. It is the ever-present reminder that even refuge carries a cost. Life grows in shadow. Beneath the streets of Victorian London, amid the smoke, the heat, and the scent of gin, small lives take shape. Children, often the offspring of publicans, patrons, or women who work above ground, live among barrels, false walls, and low ceilings. They are born into secrecy, into spaces where danger is constant and normalcy is a quiet rebellion. For them, the cellar is both cradle and classroom. From earliest breath, they learn vigilance. A footstep above the stairs commands attention. A whisper carries meaning. The knock at the door, so innocuous to outsiders, shapes instinct. The smell of gin signals presence, of ether signals caution. The children grow attuned to the room's rhythm, reading signals older than themselves, learning when to move, when to speak, and when to vanish into shadow. Survival is taught before letters, before rhyme, before simple numeracy. Play exists, but it is contained. A scrap of cloth becomes a doll, a barrel becomes a fortress. Children invent games that mimic the adult's navigation of risk, hiding behind walls, slipping silently between benches, whispering instructions across distances. Laughter is brief, careful, often interrupted by the sudden realization of who may be entering. Joy is permitted, but always measured. Education is improvised. Few formal schools reach into these basements. Literacy comes from what is overheard. Recitations of notices, fragments of books glimpsed above ground, conversations of clerks or labourers. Mathematics is learned in counting coins discreetly passed, in dividing gin rations, in estimating how many steps to safety. Knowledge is practical. It is survival. It is encoded in gestures, whispered warnings, and the rhythm of nightly life. Responsibilities arrive early. Children fetch candles, wipe spilled gin, carry small pails of water, alert adults to approaching danger. They move silently between barrels and benches, learning not only caution, but the intricacies of the underground pub's architecture. Each child becomes, in a sense, a junior guardian, trained in observation and discretion. Failure carries consequences, sometimes mild, sometimes severe. Attention to detail is not optional, it is required. Danger is constant. The fires that warm the room could burn. The knock at the door could herald the law. Adults carry the weight of responsibility, but children inherit fear in tandem with survival skills. They witness panic, whispers of scandal, and arguments that erupt in shadowed corners. They see bodies lifted, drinks hidden, and strangers vanish through secret passages. Trauma is absorbed silently, becoming part of the air they breathe, as inescapable as smoke. Yet beneath danger, a community forms. Children learn loyalty, patience, and mutual aid. They observe the rhythms of adults and mimic them. They learn which voices can be trusted, which movements signal threat. In this controlled chaos, they internalize rules not written, commands not spoken, boundaries that cannot be violated. The cellar becomes a microcosm of the wider world, a place where power, knowledge, and survival intermingle, and where the young are inducted into its hidden hierarchy early. Childhood is brief, intense, and invisible. Most leave when they come of age, absorbed into work above ground or sent to serve elsewhere. But their memories remain: the feel of low ceilings, the smell of smoke, the sudden silence at a knock, the burn of gin on the tongue. These children carry forward lessons the city above pretends never existed. They are the silent heirs of the underground, born into shadows, trained in vigilance, taught the delicate balance between fear and necessity. They are the hidden generation that sustains the secret city below. In Victorian London, children of the cellars are neither seen nor acknowledged, yet their lives, entwined with smoke and gin, preserve the pulse of the underground, generation after generation. Below ground, the city's rigid hierarchy dissolves like sugar in gin. Victorian London above insists on propriety. Street signs, etiquette manuals, and polite conversation enforce divisions, gentlemen separated from labourers, clerks from dockhands, women of virtue from those whose lives are considered tainted. Yet beneath the pavement, in the dimly lit, smoke-thick air of underground pubs, those lines blur. They do not vanish entirely, society's weight cannot be erased, but they bend, twist, and rearrange to accommodate survival. The rich and poor sit shoulder to shoulder, separated only by careful observation. A clerk in a crisp coat may find himself beside a seamstress whose fingers are raw from 12 hours of work. A dockworker leans on a barrel next to a man whose shoes have never seen mud or salt. Each measures the other, recognizing difference without judgment. Above ground, these interactions would be impossible or forbidden. Here, need creates proximity, and proximity creates awareness. Gin is the great equalizer. The burn does not discriminate. A sip warms the wealthy as readily as it numbs the poor. Hands shake the same, voices slur similarly, judgment softens for all. In this shared intoxication, class becomes a secondary detail. Wealth cannot purchase immunity from hangovers or misfortune, nor can it shield one from fear when the knock comes at the door. Conversation flows differently underground. Topics forbidden above ground: workplace abuse, wages stolen, mistresses kept in secret, emerge in hushed tones. Patrons exchange news that spans neighborhoods and social strata, gossip that would never traverse the polished parlors or lecture halls. In these conversations, experience and hardship are weighed more than pedigree. Advice travels laterally rather than downward from privilege. Those who are normally silent in society speak because survival requires communication, not submission. Trust is hard-earned but universal. A wealthy man cannot assume deference. A laborer cannot demand respect. Both are judged by their understanding of the space, their behavior under scrutiny, their ability to navigate danger. One mistake, a loud laugh, a careless gesture, a glance too long can endanger everyone. In this way, class becomes a background concern, secondary to skill, awareness, and discretion. Women, particularly, observe these lines carefully. They understand which patrons can be trusted, which movements signal threat, and which gestures maintain equilibrium. A misread patron may provoke conflict. A well-managed interaction keeps the room calm. Gender and class intersect, but all are subordinate to the shared need for secrecy and survival. Humor and subtle competition exist even here. Gentlemen may brag of offices held, clerks of intellect, laborers of strength. Yet laughter, under smoke and dim light, softens rivalry into camaraderie. For a brief night, hierarchy is replaced by immediacy, who knows the rhythm of the cellar, who can move quietly, who can pour and drink without drawing attention. This functional equality is fragile, but it works, night after night. By morning, class lines return. Above ground, the clerk resumes his desk, the dockworker returns to the wharf, the seamstress to her needle. Social order is restored, polished, rehearsed. But below, during the night, for hours measured by smoke and whispered conversation, class is negotiable, provisional, irrelevant. The underground pub teaches a lesson that society refuses to acknowledge. In shared need, survival precedes hierarchy, and even the strictest social boundaries can vanish when danger, drink, and darkness demand it. Above ground, the city speaks in sermons, pamphlets, and newspapers. Victorian London prides itself on morality. Streets are patrolled, houses inspected, laws debated. Reformers, self-appointed guardians of public virtue, patrol not only the streets, but also the minds of the population. They see the city in stark contrasts: virtue and vice, order and chaos, light and darkness. The underground pubs, hidden beneath the polished facades of houses and shops, become their obsession, a stain threatening the moral fabric of the nation. Pamphlets accuse, often without knowing the truth. Gin shops are dens of depravity, one reads, illustrations of grotesque figures clutching glasses in trembling hands. Children are abandoned, wives neglected, streets corrupted. These tracts circulate widely, read aloud in workhouses, churches, and parlours. They stir fear, outrage, and curiosity. Yet the authors rarely witness what they condemn. They rely on rumour, exaggeration, and imagination, imagining cellars as hellish spaces of unending chaos. Their narratives create shame even before anyone enters a pub. Public shame is a weapon as potent as the law. For the unlicensed publican, exposure means more than fines or imprisonment. Reputation is fragile. Neighbours whisper. Patrons hesitate. Family members judge silently or openly. The threat of disgrace shapes behaviour. Even if a raid fails to occur, the fear of moral condemnation compels discretion. Women who manage pubs are particularly vulnerable. Their presence behind the bar is framed as corrupt, improper, or scandalous. To survive, they must navigate not only physical danger, but social censure. Reformers' rhetoric is relentless. Temperance societies organise, lecture, and petition. The moral decay of London begins in its cellars, they claim. Meetings are held to discuss strategies, inspections, moral education, tighter laws. Clergymen declaim from pulpits, warning parishioners of the spiritual peril of gin, ether, and laudanum. Above ground, morality is a spectacle. Below, it is invisible, impotent, and irrelevant to those who endure. Yet reformers influence the underground indirectly. Raids are planned, legislation debated, licenses threatened, all inspired by moral panic. The underground responds with adaptation. False walls, hidden staircases, secret exits, coded knocks. Patrons learn to anticipate scrutiny, moving carefully, speaking quietly, observing patterns of enforcement. Each act of moral policing shapes the very design of concealment. The reformers unknowingly refine the skills of those they intend to shame. Shame also serves as a social signal. Regulars read each other as carefully as they read the law. A patron's hesitation, a glance of fear, or a whispered warning indicates awareness of moral oversight. Respect is granted to those who navigate it successfully, avoided by those who falter. The fear of being labelled morally weak binds the community together, reinforcing rules of discretion and silence. Judgment, though external, becomes internalized, a self-imposed restraint that ensures survival. The irony is persistent. The same city that condemns underground drinking depends on it to maintain social order. Men and women who endure long hours, hunger, and despair rely on these spaces to survive. Yet the reformers decry the very acts that preserve life. Above ground, virtue is applauded. Below, survival continues, clandestine, unacknowledged, and often imperceptibly defiant. Moral reformers imagine control. The underground teaches adaptation. Every raid, lecture, or pamphlet reinforces the need for secrecy. Each act of public shame sharpens discretion, vigilance, and skill. In this way, the city above unwittingly strengthens the hidden life beneath it, and the underground pub continues, resilient, shadowed, and alive, a testament to the enduring tension between authority, virtue, and human necessity. The city above thrives on stories, and nothing excites the press like scandal. Victorian London's newspapers are filled with accounts of vice, moral decay, and the consequences of indulgence. Yet for every story printed in bold ink, there is a shadowed truth unreadable to the curious public. The underground pubs, hidden in cellars and behind false walls, live in the space between fact and rumour, their existence refracted through the distorted lens of reporting. Rumours travel faster than ink. A spill of gin in a street cellar might inspire tales of drunken orgies, fights that never happened, or children abandoned in darkness. An accidental fire becomes proof of moral recklessness. A minor quarrel blossoms into a brawl with fatalities. Newspapers, eager to sell, embellish. The names change, the locations shift. Facts are bent to fit the narrative the city demands, that hidden drinking is evidence of universal corruption. Public perception is crafted by omission as much as by story. Readers rarely know who the patrons are, what drives them, or why they seek refuge below ground. The conditions of work, poverty, or desperation are ignored. Only the spectacle remains, the gin-stained hands, the flushed faces, the dramatic consequences imagined. Morality is simplified, complexity erased, and the underground pub becomes a symbol, less a reality than a cautionary tale. Patrons and publicans navigate these half-truths carefully. A rumor of inspection spreads like wildfire. Knocks come not only from officers but from neighbors emboldened by imagined authority. The underground adapts. Bottles are hidden, false walls secured, routes of escape rehearsed. Information, though often unreliable, becomes vital. Knowledge of what has been reported and what might be misreported guides behavior more surely than law itself. Gossip and rumor are both danger and shield. A whispered warning, they say the police are visiting Smith Street tonight, can empty a cellar before a raid begins. Conversely, rumor can draw attention. Too many tales of a particular location make it notable, and in Victorian London, notoriety invites inspection. The underground thrives on a careful balance, being talked about, but not enough to attract scrutiny, seen, but not fully understood. The newspapers serve moral reformers without intending to. Editors and reporters often believe they are protecting society by exposing vice, yet their sensational stories reinforce the need for secrecy. Every article describing chaos beneath a street corner teaches the publican how to conceal, the patron how to observe, the community how to coordinate. The more alarmed the city above becomes, the more cautious and creative the underground grows. Even when fact and fiction collide, consequences are real. A printed story of a raid may inspire officers to investigate a cellar that never existed. An embellished account of violence may cause regulars to adopt new safety measures. Lies, half-truths, exaggerations, they shape the rhythm of underground life, influencing how and when people descend into shadow, how they move, how they speak, how they hide. In this way, the press becomes part of the architecture. Ink and rumor are walls and corridors, shaping behavior as surely as brick or timber. The underground pub survives not by isolation, but by reading between the lines, understanding that what is reported above may be false, but the fear it generates is always true. Patrons learn to navigate the city not only in body and sight, but in story and imagination. In Victorian London, newspapers are more than communication. They are instruments of control, instruments of panic, and inadvertently, instruments of adaptation. The underground continues, shadowed, smoky, and alive, not erased by ink, not silenced by rumor, but shaped and sustained by both. In the dim glow of underground gaslight, words carry weight beyond their sound. The walls of Victorian London's hidden pubs have heard more than the city above can imagine. In these cellars, where smoke hangs like a curtain and the burn of gin sears the throat, people speak truths they dare not utter elsewhere. The pub is not merely a place of drink or warmth, it is a confessional, a repository for secret pain, whispered fears, and unspoken desires. Here, judgment is muted, discretion enforced by circumstance, and voices softened by necessity. The confessions come in fragments. A man leans across the table, whispering of a foreman who cheated him of wages. A woman recounts a lover abandoned, children neglected, debts piling. The gin drunk confides without artifice. Stories of despair, violence, humiliation, or fleeting triumphs. Each admission is weighed, understood, and often shared only partially, so that the speaker maintains safety while relieving the burden of isolation. These are truths, too dangerous for daylight, but urgently human in the night. The act of confession is ritualistic. It begins with proximity, seated close, voices lowered, hands resting lightly on tables. Alcohol dulls hesitation and softens self-consciousness. Smoke blurs faces, conceals eyes. A whispered name is repeated, a grievance described, a fear articulated, never for public record, never for moral judgment, only for the acknowledgement of another. The listener, whether publican or fellow patron, absorbs each word with care. Silence is the ultimate response. It validates without exposing. Women, in particular, navigate the confessional with skill. They hear without probing. They listen without judgment. They protect without being seen as accomplices. A widow behind the bar becomes priest and altar alike, offering attention, empathy, and practical guidance without ever stepping into daylight where she might be condemned. Their understanding is quiet but precise. A subtle nod, a half glance, a gesture signaling reassurance or caution. The confessions vary in purpose. Some are prayers for mercy or change, spoken aloud to unburden the conscience. Some are warnings, knowledge of a threat, a raid, or a dishonest patron. Some are shared purely for connection. In the smoke and shadows, isolation becomes bearable. Every confession is a thread in the invisible fabric that holds the underground pub together. Trust is the currency of the confessional. Revelations are carefully measured, often tested by small disclosures first. Regular patrons know which voices can be believed and which should be disregarded. Secrets are rarely repeated, and those who break this unspoken rule are quickly marginalized. In a world where exposure can lead to fines, imprisonment, or ruin, discretion is more than politeness, it is survival. Even the law cannot penetrate fully. Stories of exploitation, neglect, or impropriety thrive here precisely because they are spoken where no record exists. The city above may punish the act of drinking, but it cannot punish the truth spoken in shadows. This knowledge empowers the regulars, reinforcing the pub's function as a private sanctuary and a site of subtle social accountability. By morning, words linger in memory but vanish from sound. The patrons ascend to streets, governed by rules they cannot bend, returning to lives shaped by labor, expectation, and surveillance. Yet beneath the city, the pub waits, ready to receive them again. A confessional without altar, a sanctuary without walls. In the shadows, amid gin, smoke, and whispered truths, the city's forgotten souls confess, not for absolution, but for recognition, and the underground hums quietly with the weight of all that is unspoken. Beneath the streets, life thrives in its own uneasy terms. Victorian London above prides itself on order, cleanliness, and moral rigor. But the underground pubs tell a different story. Damp brick, low ceilings, and thick smoke combine with gin, ether, and human bodies to create an environment that is both sanctuary and hazard. Disease moves here quietly, carried on skin, breath, and shared implements. Filth is inevitable, tolerated, and managed as best as patrons can muster. Survival requires vigilance, but even vigilance cannot eliminate the ever-present risk of contagion. Every cup carries more than spirits. Gin poured from a barrel, or ether inhaled from a shared vial, is often accompanied by sweat, smoke residue, and the invisible organisms that thrive in damp, dark corners. Drinking is a communal act, and in the proximity enforced by narrow rooms, bodies, and benches, every inhale carries a trace of another. Illness spreads silently. a cough, a sneeze, a minor cut, all unnoticed until days later, when fever or fatigue arrives as a reminder that no refuge is perfect. Filth is both obstacle and camouflage. Spilled gin soaks into wooden floors, tobacco dust mixes with soot and coal, and garments carry layers of smoke and sweat. Patrons learn to navigate these conditions instinctively. A child steps carefully, avoiding damp patches. A publican wipes surfaces without fanfare. A seamstress leans into a corner to work quietly, managing needle and fabric while observing everyone else. In these conditions, the city's rigid rules of hygiene are impossible to enforce, and yet life continues. The presence of disease shapes behavior subtly. Regulars recognize early symptoms in themselves and others: pallor, coughs, tremors. They adjust seating, sharing space only when necessary. Someone visibly ill may be isolated discreetly, directed to a side room or hidden passage. This is not charity. It is self-preservation. Infection threatens everyone. Knowledge of it becomes instinct, learned by observation, repeated behavior, and cautious experience. Children are especially vulnerable. Born into smoke, gin, and filth, they breathe what adults breathe and touch what adults touch. They learn early the need to avoid spills, to navigate around coals, to keep distance from the visibly ill. Yet they also absorb the resilience and cunning of survival. They become adept at reading signs that adults may not notice: a shiver, a cough, a strange odor. Their health is fragile, their endurance hard-earned. Social hierarchy is reinforced and undermined simultaneously. Illness and filth ignore class. A clerk, a laborer, a publican's daughter, they are all equally susceptible. Yet those with resources often have subtle advantages: access to a private corner, an extra garment, a heated bench near the fire. The underground pub mitigates disparities where possible, but nature and circumstance remain indifferent. Even in filth, community persists. Patrons share towels, water, and first aid for cuts and burns, though never openly. The room hums with collective care, muted and pragmatic. Every gesture is calculated for survival rather than virtue. The human body is fragile, but solidarity, quiet, discreet, essential, provides a measure of defense. Above ground, the city condemns disease as evidence of vice. The newspapers blame poverty, negligence, and moral weakness. Temperance societies decry the consequences of indulgence. Yet below, disease is a companion, not a punishment. It is the shadow that exists alongside smoke and gin, a reminder that life continues even in conditions deemed unacceptable, and that survival is always an act of adaptation, endurance, and careful observation. In the underground pub, every sip, every breath, every shared cup carries risk and reprieve alike. The patrons endure both willingly, understanding that filth, disease, and neglect are inseparable from the fragile sanctuary that allows them to exist alive, hidden, and momentarily free beneath the city that refuses to see them. The cold comes first, not the polite chill of a January morning, nor the occasional breeze that drifts between buildings. This is a cold that bites through wool and leather, that creeps down sleeves and coats, that presses against the skin and fills the lungs with frost. In winter, Victorian London above is grey and cruel, but beneath the streets it becomes merciless. The underground pub, already shadowed and smoky, becomes a haven and a trap. Patrons arrive shivering. Hands are raw from coal dust and wind, faces reddened by frost, bodies stiff from hours of exposure. The warmth above ground is rarely enough to comfort them. Gas lamps do little for bodies soaked with sleet or snow. Streets are clogged with ice and mud. Below, the cellar is slightly warmer, but the fire is small, the lamps weak, the air heavy with smoke. It is never truly warm, only less lethal than the streets. The cold dictates behavior. People move closer to the fire. their bodies pressing against one another, not for intimacy but for survival. Blankets, borrowed from home, wrap shoulders and laps. Feet are tucked beneath benches or barrels. Movement is slow, deliberate, conserving heat and avoiding the hazard of spills or knocks that could amplify risk. Even laughter and conversation are hushed as sound carries further in the still, icy air of winter nights. Gin burns differently in the cold. The sharp spirit warms from the inside, a temporary shield against numbness. Sips are measured, bottles are hoarded and rationed. The ether calm, inhaled carefully, smooths trembling hands and stiff joints. Those uninitiated may take too much, leading to accidents on wet floors or near candles. Seasoned patrons drink strategically, balancing burn and numbness, aware that warmth is borrowed, fleeting, and precious. Smoke rises sluggishly. In summer, it curls and diffuses. In winter, it hangs low, weighted by dense, cold air. It obscures vision, dampens sound, and cloaks identity. But it also presses on skin and lungs with relentless weight. Patrons cough lightly, fans of smoke swirl it gently, and everyone adjusts instinctively. Each movement is calculated to avoid suffocation or detection, to maintain the fragile equilibrium that keeps the room functional. Children are at greatest risk. Their bodies are smaller, more vulnerable to cold, damp, and the chemical effects of gin or ether they may inhale. They learn quickly to huddle, to move with purpose, to avoid the hottest embers and the sharpest edges. Their play is muted and deliberate, structured around survival rather than whimsy. In winter, even the smallest lapse can be costly. Fire is managed carefully. Candles flicker, lamps sputter, embers glow. The warmth they produce is vital, but too much heat can ignite spilled spirits, while too little leaves patrons exposed. Publicans and regulars manipulate every source of fire with precision, balancing light, heat, and safety. The cellar itself becomes a dynamic organism, reacting to the movement, breath, and chemical presence of everyone inside. The night stretches long. Outside, snow drifts, wind whistles through alleys, and the city above sleeps or pretends to. Below, the pub is a sanctuary, a school, a confessional, a battlefield, and a hearth. Patrons share warmth, stories, and survival strategies. They endure the frost, the smoke, and the lingering dangers together. Winter nights teach patience, vigilance, and cooperation, revealing character in every shiver, every measured sip, every whispered instruction. In these cold, dim cellars, survival is everything. The underground pub exists because the streets above are too cruel, the city too indifferent, and the night too long. Winter, with its bite and weight, sharpens instincts, hardens resolve, and reminds all who descend that warmth is precious, safety is fragile, and endurance is the currency of life below the city. The hours pass slowly, marked by candle flames that sputter and flicker in the smoke-thick air. Patrons drink cautiously, sip by measured sip, their bodies warmed yet tense, aware that every footstep above could announce intrusion. Music, when it arrives, is muted, a thread of sound that twists around benches and barrels before dissolving into the shadows. Conversations are brief, careful, laden with half-truths and coded phrases. Each hour carries weight, the risk of discovery, the exhaustion of vigilance, and the ever-present knowledge that the night will end and they will have to return to the streets above. The end of the night is ritualized, though rarely spoken aloud. The publican begins subtly. Bottles are replaced, glasses wiped, spills cleaned, candles are trimmed, lanterns shielded. Every action is deliberate, a quiet signal to patrons that the night's pleasures must yield to daylight. Regulars sense the rhythm, a nod here, a shift of furniture there, a glance toward the stairs. They adjust accordingly, preparing to leave as silently as they arrived. Drinkers finish quickly, not out of haste, but of necessity. Gin burns the throat differently as the night wanes. Ether calms the nerves, but its effect fades with exposure to cold air above. The final sips are both relief and ritual, a farewell to warmth, to numbness, to the fragile safety of the cellar. Children who have played quietly, who have navigated shadows and hazards, gather small blankets and clothe themselves in layers for the ascent. Everyone moves with purpose, aware that the moment of transition carries the highest risk. Exit is measured, deliberate, and coordinated. Steps are slow to avoid misalignment with creaking floorboards. Chairs and barrels are shifted to cover exits, false walls adjusted for the next night. Every door is checked twice, every hidden passage accounted for. Those who know the space guide the uninitiated, whispering instructions only the necessary can hear. Silence is paramount. No laughter, no cough, no unnecessary breath. Each patron becomes acutely aware of sound, shadow, and placement. The knock that began the night may be anticipated, but is still feared. Neighbors might be awake, landlords alert, or the city above may have noticed patterns that suggest activity. The final moments in the cellar are a test of discipline. Any misstep, a slip of a hand, a squeak of a floorboard, a glance too long can undo hours of care. Regulars have learned the choreography. Every movement deliberate, every gesture significant, every breath weighed against consequence. Above, the city sleeps or pretends to. Street lamps glow faintly. Carriages have ceased. The wind whispers through alleys, and the snow or rain muffles distant footsteps. Those who ascend emerge from the shadows, shedding the cellar's atmosphere as they climb. Smoke clings briefly to clothing. Scent of gin and ether follows faintly, a mark invisible yet intimate. Faces harden once again, expressions composed, posture restored. Patrons return to the life above, clerk, labourer, seamstress, widow, all resuming roles imposed by society. Yet the memory of the night persists. Every hidden glance, every whispered confession, every shared smile or cautionary gesture remains etched in mind. The underground pub has offered warmth, relief, and communion, but it has also reminded all who gathered of the fragility of safety and the omnipresence of risk. Survival is not finished until the final step out of shadow into light. By the first light of dawn, the cellar is empty. Tables are reset, floors swept, barrels replaced, candles are extinguished or left to burn low, lanterns concealed. The room breathes again, a silent witness to the lives it sheltered, the secrets it held, the dangers it contained. It waits patiently for nightfall, when the ritual will begin anew, when smoke will rise, and when the hidden city will reclaim its pulse beneath Victorian London. The night ends, but the underground endures, eternal, shadowed, and alive. Dawn arrives reluctantly in Victorian London, pale and unkind. Above ground, the city awakens to the harshness of coal smoke, frost-crusted streets, and the clatter of carts. The gas lamps are extinguished, leaving only the weak, grey light of winter or the pallor of early morning. Windows open to chilly air, chimneys puff thin streams of smoke, and life resumes its rigid patterns. Clerks to offices, labourers to docks, seamstresses to workshops. Above, society moves according to rules, schedules, and appearances. Below, the patrons of the underground pub have vanished, or so it seems. The cellar is quiet now, but not empty in memory. Every surface bears the faint trace of the night. Footprints pressed into damp floors, spilled gin absorbed into wood, candle wax hardened on edges, smoke clinging stubbornly to beams. The room holds the echoes of laughter, whispers, confessions, arguments, and the tense anticipation that punctuated every knock. It waits for the next evening to breathe again, but for now, it is still, a container of secrets no one above can imagine. Those who emerged carried dual realities. The gin-drunk wakes stiff and achy, the ether calm fading, leaving minds and bodies raw. Limbs ache from crouched positions, narrow benches, and the unnatural vigilance required below. Eyes sting from smoke inhaled too deeply, throats scratch from coal, alcohol, and whispered words. Hunger returns with the daylight, more insistent than the previous evening's dull burn. Fatigue lingers, shadowed by the relief that the night ended without discovery. Memory is selective, fragmented, unreliable. The events of the night, who spoke, what was whispered, who glanced at whom, are reconstructed internally, often differently by each participant. This is intentional. The cellar's rules require discretion, and the mind enforces it naturally. No record exists, no official acknowledgement is made. The city above, concerned with propriety, remains blind. Patrons remember, but only what is necessary, only what keeps them safe. Regulars return to roles imposed above. A clerk straightens his coat, adjusts his tie, and steps into the office, speaking with measured civility to colleagues who know nothing of the life beneath his feet. A laborer trudges to the dock, hands stiff, boots wet, mind preoccupied with yesterday's wages and tonight's survival. Women resume sewing, household tasks, or service work, carrying with them the knowledge of what was said, who watched, who was trusted. Their public faces are composed, obedient, and unremarkable. Above, no one suspects that beneath the city another reality thrived while they slept or pretended to. Confessions linger internally. The whispered truths told in smoke-filled corners, the stories of grievance, survival, and despair, follow patrons into daylight. They are carried silently, folded into posture, glance, and expression. A sigh here, a moment of hesitation there, marks those who have descended and returned. These memories are both burden and ballast, shaping decisions, alliances, and awareness of the world above. The city remains unchanged, but the individuals do not. The underground pub has imparted lessons impossible to learn in offices, factories, or parlors. Risk, discretion, observation, and community skills honed beneath the streets inform behavior in daylight. Safety is never taken for granted. Trust is evaluated continuously. Silence is valued above speech, and every morning after is a test of endurance, memory, and adaptability. By mid-morning, life is outwardly routine. Yet beneath every step, behind every door, inside every carefully measured glance, the night persists. The city above is oblivious to the dual existence coiled beneath its feet. Patrons carry both worlds, the rigid daylight society and the smoky, gin-scented, dangerous, intimate realm of the cellar. The morning after is a quiet negotiation between these realities, a liminal space between safety and vulnerability, between memory and survival, until the night descends again. The city above prides itself on order, progress, and civility. Gas lamps illuminate streets lined with cobblestones, townhouses polished to reflect propriety, and shop fronts promising efficiency and respectability. Yet beneath these veneers, beneath brick and timber, London has created its own rhythm, a parallel life that persists regardless of law, morality, or reform. The underground pub, once a novelty, a desperate refuge, has become ordinary, a fixture of survival, as reliable and essential as the very streets it hides beneath. Regulars no longer speak of it as illicit. The thrill of secrecy has diminished over decades. Men, women, and children descend without hesitation, guided by tradition and inherited knowledge. Knocks are made without fear, movements are deliberate, and patterns are remembered and repeated with precision. The cellar becomes a second home, its rhythms embedded in daily life. People grow accustomed to the duality: obedience above ground, refuge below. Habit shapes expectation. Gin is no longer merely intoxicant, it is part of survival. Ether, laudanum, tobacco, all exist in measured coexistence, tools for endurance rather than indulgence. Smoky haze, candlelight, low ceilings, and false walls become background, unnoticed once familiarity sets in. The room, once novel, becomes comfortable, almost predictable. Patrons anticipate raids, trust rituals, and navigate the space with efficiency. What was once daring has become functional, normalized, and even necessary. The city's failures codify the underground's permanence. Above ground, poverty persists, wages remain insufficient, housing is inadequate, and morality is policed selectively. The underground does not exist in defiance alone. It exists because the streets above fail to meet human need. Each raid, fine, and moralistic pamphlet teaches adaptation rather than submission. The cellar becomes a curriculum, training generations in observation, discretion, and survival. To those who descend, the city above is neither benevolent nor indifferent. It is irrelevant. The underground is life. Social norms shift below ground. Class boundaries blur completely in this space. The dock worker, clerk, widow, and gentleman share proximity and vulnerability. Respect is earned not by pedigree, but by awareness, courage, and prudence. Trust is absolute yet conditional. Secrets are shared and preserved because they are necessary for collective survival. In this normalized state, survival is communal rather than solitary, and hierarchy exists only in terms of knowledge and skill. The routine of risk becomes invisible. Knocks at doors, the threat of raids, fire hazards, and disease are managed automatically. Every movement is rehearsed, every glance calculated. Laughter returns to corners of the room, confessions are whispered, and minor altercations are contained before they escalate. Participants navigate danger as naturally as they breathe. The extraordinary becomes ordinary. Life underground is no longer temporary, it is a parallel reality with its own rules, calendars, and customs. Even reformers, officers, and the law contribute unwittingly. Raids, fines, and moral condemnation teach lessons that strengthen the underground. Each attempt to suppress or control leads to innovation, caution, and subtle refinement of the space. The city above unwittingly ensures the permanence of what it seeks to eradicate. Underground drinking, secrecy, and adaptation are no longer anomalies, they are woven into the fabric of urban life. When night falls, the cellar hums with routine. The gaslight flickers, smoke hangs thick, and gin burns steadily. Patrons descend without hesitation. Children navigate shadows with practiced skill. Women behind the bar orchestrate movement with subtle precision, and music and conversation flow in careful harmony. The underground pub has ceased to be an emergency or novelty. It is normal, functional, and indispensable. A city within a city, hidden in plain sight, resilient and eternal. Above ground, order demands appearances. Licensed establishments, polished floors, brass fixtures, and swinging doors pride themselves on civility, legality, and patronage sanctioned by law. They are proud of their regulation, their permits, their place in a city that celebrates propriety and despises disorder. Yet even these bastions of order feel the persistent pull of the underground, the invisible competition lurking beneath cobblestones, smoke, and brick. The licensed pub exists in paradox. Its legitimacy is a shield and a constraint. Licensees pay fees, maintain books, and endure inspections. They are beholden to magistrates and reformers, expected to uphold morality in practice and appearance. And yet, the patrons they hope to serve, laborers, clerks, artisans, and even gentlemen descend nightly into cellars that promise warmth, secrecy, and cheap spirits. Every evening, the licensed pub is reminded of its limitations. What legality cannot offer, secrecy can. Competition breeds resentment. Licensed publicans whisper of lost trade, of patrons vanishing below ground, returning only when debt or hunger compels them. Boards are posted advertising hours and prices, yet cellars thrive unnoticed. Rumor spreads. The law is uneven, the underground unpredictable, the real city hidden. These establishments begin to strategize, seeking to reclaim relevance, to channel fear, morality, or novelty into their favor. They adopt mimicry. Some licensed pubs experiment with concealment, creating semi-private rooms, lowering lights, permitting smoke, and softening restrictions on drink. They advertise discretion, hinting at secrecy, without admitting association with the illegal practices beneath their feet. Others lean on moral spectacle, prominent displays of temperance, conduct, and decorum that reassure patrons of safety while subtly shaming the cellar-bound. Each tactic is a dance between law, desire, and necessity. Bribes and alliances emerge. Licensed pubs occasionally inform authorities of underground activity, seeking favor or protection. Officers, aware of the threats, sometimes tolerate subtle incentives, early notices, shared information, quiet cooperation. These relationships are delicate, temporary, and fraught. Trust and betrayal exist in small gestures, a whispered warning, a withheld name, a momentary glance. Even legality is maneuvered, bent to the benefit of survival and profit. Patrons respond unpredictably. Some are drawn by the allure of legality, comfort, warmth, predictability. Others recoil, preferring the intimacy and secrecy of hidden cellars. Class and desire shape decisions. A gentleman may sip in licensed splendor, then descend beneath the streets later for true refuge. A laborer may avoid the polished hall altogether, seeking cheaper, riskier comfort below. The interplay is constant, shaping both business and behavior. Conflict occasionally erupts. Fights, complaints, and tensions surface when patrons test boundaries. Licensed owners attempt to enforce rules, sometimes with violence, often with negotiation. Patrons push against the constraints imposed above ground. The cellar's influence is subtle but persistent. Even a licensed pub must acknowledge the space beneath, adapt to it, or risk irrelevance. The city observes, or pretends to. Inspectors, reformers, and journalists highlight the struggle as evidence of moral superiority or decay. In truth, the conflict between licensed establishments and underground pubs reveals the limits of authority. The desires of the city's inhabitants cannot be fully controlled, only channeled or postponed. By nightfall, the struggle continues. Lights flicker in licensed halls, mirrors reflect the cautious revelry within, and the street hums with footsteps heading below. The underground persists, resilient and unrecorded. Above, licensed pubs fight, adapt, and endure, but they cannot replace the secret warmth, smoke, and liberty offered to those who descend into shadows. In Victorian London, legality may be visible, moral authority may be enforced, but the underground remains eternal. Above ground, judgment wears a robe. Courtrooms in Victorian London are designed to impress, intimidate, and instruct. Polished benches, tall ceilings, and rigid seating convey authority. Magistrates sit elevated, their voices echoing with gravity, pronouncing law and morality as one inseparable command. Above, society demands order. Below, the underground pub exists, unrecorded, unacknowledged, and dangerously necessary. Every arrest, every trial, every verdict is a performance intended for public consumption, even as it inadvertently shapes the shadows beneath. Language becomes weapon and spectacle. Terms like vice, corruption, and immorality fill proceedings. Witnesses testify with dramatic flourish, describing cellars as dens of iniquity, jinn as a poison of the soul, patrons as embodiments of neglect and degradation. Moral language saturates every statement. The courtroom is not merely adjudicating legality, it is performing righteousness, creating a theatre in which society reassures itself that order can be maintained, that virtue is enforceable, that sin is identifiable. The underground pub exists beyond such language. Words like illegal or immoral mean little beneath brick and timber. Patrons and publicans have already learned to translate moral accusation into strategy, concealment, silence, coded communication. They understand that the courtroom judges appearances more than realities. The law speaks in absolutes. The cellar thrives in ambiguity. Every public pronouncement from above teaches new patterns of caution below. Trials serve as warnings, but also education. Patrons observe reports of arrests, sentences, and fines. They read newspapers, listen to gossip, and interpret the moral tone of each case. From these they learn how far to push, when to speak, whom to trust. They adjust entry patterns, seating arrangements, and conversational content accordingly. The courtroom's language, intended to enforce morality, becomes a curriculum for survival, a subtle lesson in discretion, timing, and adaptation. Publicans endure scrutiny and intimidation. Those caught running unlicensed establishments face fines, imprisonment, and public shame. Magistrate statements are recorded in writing, repeated in press, repeated in conversation. Each word shapes perception. The corrupting influence of jinn, the moral degradation of youth, the danger to society. The publican listens carefully, interprets cautiously, and adjusts the cellar's operations. Walls are reinforced, false panels repaired, and entry patterns refined. The courtroom's rhetoric extends beneath the street, influencing behavior without ever entering it directly. Language also regulates social perception. Patrons learn to manage gestures, expressions, and conversation in anticipation of scrutiny. Every cough, whisper, or laugh is tempered. Children mimic adult caution, absorbing lessons in observation and discretion long before they understand law or morality in formal terms. The words of the court, though never spoken directly in the cellar, echo in habit, shaping silence as much as behavior. Irony is pervasive. The courtroom, in asserting moral authority, inadvertently strengthens the underground. Each warning, each lecture, each declaration of vice teaches patrons and publicans how to hide, how to maneuver, how to survive. Moral language becomes a map of risk. The higher the rhetoric above, the more precise the adaptation below. Society believes it shapes behavior. In truth, it teaches concealment, refinement, and resilience. By the time patrons descend into shadow again, they carry lessons in silence, timing, and observation. The courtroom's words are heavy with judgment, yet they cannot pierce brick, smoke, and candlelight. They cannot erase secrecy. They cannot fully define necessity. In the underground pub, law is abstract, morality performative, and survival practical. Words, like walls, are only effective if understood, and those who dwell below have already learned to read between the lines. Silence descends differently in the cellar. Not the quiet that accompanies the end of a night, not the hush of vigilance, but the absolute pause that follows tragedy. In the underground pubs of Victorian London, death is rare, but when it comes, it arrives without ceremony and without witnesses. The room, thick with smoke and the lingering scent of spirits, holds its breath. Every patron senses it before they fully understand. A body stills, a hand falls, and the fragile equilibrium of the night is shattered. Illness, accident, and violence all converge here. A slip on damp floorboards near a candle can ignite a chain of events that ends in fatal injury. Gin burns, ether calms, but neither protects against misjudged movements or overestimation of strength. Fights, when they escalate, can leave someone beyond saving before aid arrives. Disease, cholera, influenza, or typhus lurks in every breath, every shared cup, every hand that touches coin or cloth. In these cellars, death is rarely dramatic. It is silent, insidious, immediate. The publican becomes both witness and mediator. A woman behind the bar, a man who manages the cellar, assumes responsibility swiftly. The body is moved, if possible, to a corner away from the flow of others. Spills are cleaned, embers extinguished, and evidence minimized. There is no time for ceremony, for lamentation, for acknowledgement. Survival demands that attention remain on the living. Every act is calculated to maintain calm, prevent panic, and ensure that the night continues. Patrons respond instinctively. Some freeze, eyes wide, unsure whether to move or speak. Some assist quietly, offering blankets, water, or discreet support. Children, if present, are guided away, shielded from the worst. Laughter, music, and conversation resume slowly, cautiously, like ripples across a disturbed surface. The cellar must maintain function even while grief or fear lingers beneath. Death is never discussed openly. Outside the walls, Victorian society is eager to ascribe blame. Gin, ether, negligence, immorality. Inside, however, silence is compulsory. The living understand that talking too much could invite scrutiny, punishment, or further tragedy. Names are not spoken, circumstances are only hinted at. What happens below must remain invisible above. Rumor is dangerous, and discretion is survival. Yet memory preserves the event. The room remembers, etched in gestures, glances, and quiet knowledge. Patrons note what led to the death, the misplaced step, the overlooked spill, the moment of overconfidence. They carry it forward as lesson and caution. In this way, even tragedy becomes a teacher, shaping behavior, heightening awareness, and reinforcing the rules of the cellar. Every subsequent knock, every poured glass, every whispered word is informed by it. Children learn early the fragility of life. They witness, in shadowed corners, the consequences of misstep. They learn to respect the burn of gin, the haze of smoke, and the dangers inherent in the space. They learn that survival is not only about secrecy, but also about attentiveness, care, and understanding limits. Death transforms the cellar. It is a reminder of risk, the cost of indulgence, and the precariousness of sanctuary. Yet, paradoxically, it also reinforces community. Those who survive, who continue to descend night after night, do so with heightened vigilance, deeper trust in one another, and a sharpened understanding of the fragile ecosystem beneath the city. The cellar endures, shadowed and alive, carrying memory alongside smoke and gin, whispering that life below, though dangerous, is also indispensable. Victorian London above calls itself orderly, moral, and civilized. Street lamps glow along cobblestone avenues, merchants polish brass fixtures, and gentlemen tip hats with calculated politeness. Reformers lecture from pulpits, magistrates write judgments, newspapers print moral outrage. Yet beneath this orderly surface, beneath brick and timber, a city survives by other means. The underground pubs are not merely refuges, they are essential arteries in the life of a metropolis that demands endurance, resilience, and discretion from its inhabitants. The need is immediate, palpable, and unspoken. Labourers who endure freezing docks, long hours, and paltry wages descend into cellars for warmth and brief solace. Clerks, trapped in offices that calculate their value in numbers, not humanity, slip below to breathe in anonymity. Women, whose labor is exploited above ground and whose survival often depends on discretion, seek temporary reprieve. Even children, navigating shadows and smoke, inherit a need they cannot yet articulate. Above ground, life demands compliance. Below, survival requires relief. These pubs provide more than drink. Gin warms bodies against winter's bite. Ether dulls nerves frayed by exhaustion and anxiety. Smoke masks identity and softens observation, allowing patrons to exist in a liminal space between exposure and concealment. Walls, low ceilings, false panels, and hidden stairways create a geography of secrecy, where the city's social and legal constraints are suspended, if only temporarily. Here, hierarchy is fluid. Wealth, rank, and pedigree matter less than awareness, caution, and the ability to navigate danger. The city's failures reinforce necessity. Housing is overcrowded, wages are insufficient, sanitation is poor, the law is selective and often indifferent. Above, moralists blame vice. Below, necessity is unmistakable. The underground is not rebellion for pleasure's sake, it is adaptation. Without these hidden spaces, many lives above would collapse under deprivation, exposure, and unrelenting labor. The city depends on their existence, even as it publicly condemns them. Publicans become stewards of survival. They manage risk, maintain discretion, and mediate conflict. Every knock at the door is read carefully. Every spill is cleaned immediately. Every conflict is contained before escalation. They balance the fragile ecosystem of patrons, protecting the vulnerable and guiding the regulars through the unspoken rules of survival. Their labor is invisible, their authority unacknowledged, yet the city's functioning depends upon it. Patrons internalize lessons nightly. Observation, patience, and discretion become instinct. They learn to read signals in smoke, movement, and expression. The children of the cellar, in particular, absorb the mechanics of risk, community, and caution, internalizing survival strategies long before formal education or social recognition. Every night reinforces the delicate balance of need, threat, and endurance. The paradox is unmistakable. The city above condemns, prosecutes, and moralizes, yet it relies on what it denounces. Without the underground, the exhausted, impoverished, and overworked could not survive the demands of labor, weather, or society. The cellar provides warmth, respite, and even solidarity services, invisible to authority yet critical to the metropolis's functioning. By the first light of dawn, the patrons return to streets above. Their faces, hands, and clothing bear traces of gin, smoke, and exertion, yet they carry memories of survival, community, and fleeting freedom. The city above, oblivious to the hidden mechanisms that sustain it, continues its work, unaware of the essential function performed below. The underground pub, though condemned and illegal, persists not by law or morality but by necessity, proving that the city, in truth, needs it more than it admits. Time is relentless, and even shadows shift with it. The underground pubs that once thrived beneath Victorian London were not immortal. For decades, they existed in delicate balance between law and evasion, necessity and indulgence, secrecy and exposure. Yet change is inevitable. Shifts in society, law, and technology slowly began to erode the conditions that allowed these cellars to flourish. Decline arrived gradually, almost imperceptibly, until one day the places that had once pulsed with clandestine life were fewer, quieter, and more fragile. Legislation tightened relentlessly. New licensing laws, stricter enforcement, and a more organized police force reduced tolerance for clandestine activity. Raids became more precise and predictable. The occasional bribe or blind eye, which had once sufficed to maintain operation, lost efficacy. Publicans faced higher fines and longer imprisonment. and the consequences of exposure became increasingly severe. Some closed voluntarily rather than risk ruin. Others were shuttered forcibly, their cellars emptied, their secret lives erased. Economic and social changes contributed. Industrialization brought shifts in labor patterns. Factories and offices demanded longer hours, leaving fewer willing or able to descend into basements after work. Urban redevelopment displaced entire neighborhoods, dismantling the infrastructure that hid stairways, vaults, and false walls. Coal, soot, and smoke remained, but the population that had relied on the cellars' refuge became less numerous, more mobile, or more closely monitored. The rhythms of survival adapted, but the space to perform them contracted. Cultural attitudes evolved, slowly but insistently. Temperance movements gained traction. Moralizing voices reached wider audiences, and middle-class ideals of respectability seeped into working-class consciousness. Drinking became less clandestine and more regulated. Social spaces above ground offered controlled indulgence, reducing reliance on secret cellars. Patrons, wary of punishment and shifting norms, frequented legal establishments or found other means of coping with cold, hunger, and exhaustion. The publicans themselves aged or disappeared. Women who had once orchestrated entire cellars with deft authority grew weary, passed away, or were displaced by circumstance. Men who had navigated knocks, fire, and risk lost stamina, patience, or opportunity. Without skilled guidance, the delicate ecosystems of these pubs could not survive. Those who remained did so with less confidence, fewer patrons, and increased risk. Some cellars transformed rather than vanished. A back room once devoted to gin might become storage, a hidden stairway blocked permanently, a cellar leased to a legitimate business. Architecture adapted, repurposed by necessity, leaving traces of the past, faded scorch marks, worn floors, faint smells of smoke, but no living life to animate them. Memory persists in stories whispered among those who survived, yet the substance of the pub, the hum of voices, the warmth of illicit drink, the vigilance and camaraderie faded, yet disappearance was never absolute. Even as the majority vanished, a few spaces endured, hidden with greater cunning, preserved by stubborn regulars, or tolerated due to corruption, negligence, or oversight. They became rarer, riskier, and more mythic. Stories circulated, tales of cellars that remained open, of knocks and passwords passed down, of gin that still burned. In these remnants, the spirit of the underground persisted, though diminished and isolated. The decline illustrates the city's paradox. Victorian London sought to eradicate vice, enforce morality, and control necessity. In doing so, it dismantled much of the infrastructure that had allowed survival in shadow. Yet even in disappearance, the underground left traces in memory, architecture, and the lingering understanding that need will always find refuge. What was once ordinary became legend, and what survived did so quietly, awaiting those who remembered how to descend once more. The city above proclaimed victory. Legislation had tightened, raids had grown more efficient, and moral reformers celebrated the decline of vice beneath cobblestones and brick. Yet, the underground pubs, though diminished, were not entirely extinguished. What survived the crackdowns did so through cunning, adaptability, and the stubborn necessity of human need. In these spaces, life persisted in shadow, shaped by centuries of survival and the knowledge that the city above could never fully control what it refused to see. Adaptation became instinct. Publicans learned to anticipate every threat. Knock patterns were revised nightly, entrances concealed with greater subtlety, and false walls adjusted with mechanical precision. Fire, disease, and exposure were mitigated with experience. Spills cleaned immediately, candles shielded, escape routes rehearsed. Smoke, which once provided cover, was used more strategically, diffusing in patterns that obscured movement, yet allowed ventilation. Every surviving cellar was a masterclass in the art of living unseen. The surviving patrons were the most skilled. Those who continued to descend were not merely seeking pleasure. They were experts in negotiation, discretion, and observation. Clerks, laborers, seamstresses, and even occasional gentlemen had learned to read signals instantly: the glance of a publican, the subtle shift of a barrel, the angle of a candle flame. Trust was hard-earned and tightly guarded. Children, when present, moved silently and understood the rules as if by instinct, passing safely through shadows that would confuse or trap the inexperienced. Networks persisted, invisible yet enduring. The surviving underground was less dense but more interconnected. Patrons and publicans maintained lines of communication through whispers, gestures, and coded exchanges. Newcomers were introduced carefully, vetted by reputation and observation. Rumors still circulated, but only selectively. A warning of raids, a note of danger, a hint of opportunity. Knowledge became currency, and the ability to act on it separated survival from disaster. Architecture was refined. False walls became more sophisticated, trapdoors better concealed, hidden chambers more intricately designed. Some cellars were connected to neighboring basements or forgotten tunnels, providing alternative exits and refuge. Ventilation, fire management, and lighting were carefully calibrated. The survivors transformed spaces that had once been crude improvisations into carefully maintained sanctuaries, blending necessity with ingenuity. Cultural memory reinforced survival. Stories of raids, fines, and moral condemnation were passed quietly from patron to patron. Each narrative carried lessons: how to move, how to speak, how to protect the vulnerable, how to navigate law and circumstance. These oral histories became part of the cellar itself, embedded in its routines, its gestures, and the instinctive behavior of everyone present. What survived was as much knowledge as space. The underground's purpose endured. Even diminished, the pubs continued to serve as refuge, confessional, community, and laboratory of survival. The poor still needed warmth, solace, and discretion. The weary still sought relief. The city above still demanded compliance while ignoring necessity. In these remaining cellars, the delicate ecosystem persisted, teaching vigilance, caution, and quiet solidarity to anyone willing to descend. Survival itself became ritual. Each night required preparation, awareness, and discipline. Patrons and publicans alike understood that exposure could end life or liberty. Yet the space persisted, a testament to human adaptation and the city's inability to fully regulate what it needed. Smoke, gin, and secrecy continued to intertwine, preserving the essential function of the underground, to shelter those whom the city above either overlooked or condemned. In the shadows, the spirit of the underground remained. Crackdowns had reduced numbers, disrupted patterns, and erased some histories, but the essence endured. Where light failed, memory and skill prevailed. Where law demanded conformity, survival demanded secrecy. What survived the crackdowns was not merely the cellar itself, but the resilience, ingenuity, and quiet defiance of those who refused to vanish beneath the weight of authority. The streets above have changed, but the city remembers. Victorian London's cobblestones have been replaced in parts, gas lamps swapped for electric glow, factories modernized, and laws codified with greater reach. Yet beneath the pavement, in hidden vaults and abandoned cellars, traces of the underground persist. Echoes linger, not audible, not visible, but felt by those who know how to look, smell, and imagine. Modern London, bustling and indifferent, still carries the residue of the hidden pubs that once pulsed with necessity, secrecy, and survival. Architecture preserves memory. False walls may remain, hidden behind later renovations. Cellar staircases, now blocked or repurposed, hint at passages long forgotten. Brick and timber bear stains of smoke and spilled spirits, nearly invisible to casual inspection, but preserved for those attuned to detail. Lantern hooks, scorched floorboards, and worn thresholds mark where life once moved quietly beneath the city, and careful observers can reconstruct, in imagination, the flow of patrons, the placement of benches, and the dance of vigilance that once dominated every corner. The lessons endure. Even as physical spaces vanish, the behavioral imprint remains. Stories passed down through families, through oral histories, and through cultural memory preserve the rhythms of the underground. Measured knocks, coded glances, silent observation, careful management of fire and alcohol. Patrons of the present may not sip gin or inhale ether, but the principles of discretion, observation, and adaptation survive in other forms: hidden networks, secret knowledge, and the quiet art of surviving systems that watch but do not see. Cultural consciousness carries the shadows. Writers, historians, and urban explorers chronicle the hidden city, discovering fragments of cellars and tunnels, piecing together the stories of those who once relied on clandestine refuge. Novels, newspapers, and memoirs evoke the dim light, the haze of smoke, and the nervous energy of the cellar, allowing modern Londoners to experience vicariously what was once ordinary, yet perilous. The hidden life becomes legend, and legend informs understanding of the city's social history. The scent of memory lingers. Even in spaces repurposed for commerce or residence, the faint odor of damp wood, coal, and lingering spirits may remain, a ghostly reminder of past activity. It is subtle, often ignored, but it marks the city as layered, inhabited by histories that refuse erasure. Awareness of this residue teaches caution, respect, and humility. Modern life is built upon the survival of those who once navigated darkness below. Modern authorities unwittingly continue the pattern. Regulation, surveillance, and policing have replaced the informal negotiations of the past. Yet, hidden practices, speakeasies, informal gatherings, and discreet consumption persist. The city adapts around these behaviors, just as it once tolerated, ignored, or inadvertently enabled the Victorian underground. The echoes of necessity, innovation, and secrecy resonate, influencing contemporary culture and urban design. The social function remains instructive. The underground pubs taught lessons about community, resilience, and survival. They demonstrated the limits of law, the persistence of need, and the ingenuity of those forced to navigate danger quietly. Modern London, while technologically advanced and socially transformed, inherits these lessons in more subtle forms. In the clandestine negotiation of space, in the unrecorded networks of support, in the quiet resilience of those overlooked by official structures. In the end, the past and present intertwine. Beneath the polished streets and modern buildings, echoes of Victorian underground pubs persist, reminding the city that life, necessity, and survival do not vanish entirely with law or reform. The hidden city endures in memory, architecture, and practice, a testament to the resilience of those who lived, drank, and survived in shadows. Modern London may walk above without noticing, but the pulse of the cellar, measured and patient, continues to beat beneath. Victorian London insists on appearances. The city above declares itself orderly, moral, and disciplined. Streets are patrolled, windows polished, and facades scrubbed of smoke and soot. Families parade propriety, merchants display polish, and reformers preach virtue. Yet beneath this veneer, the underground pub thrived for decades as a space where the rules of respectability were rewritten, bent, and suspended entirely. In smoke-filled cellars, amid the burn of gin and the hush of whispered confession, the city's moral hierarchy was quietly challenged. Respectability becomes a matter of negotiation. Above ground, social standing dictates behavior. The clerk obeys, the dock worker endures, the widow maintains appearances. Below ground, these rules blur. Wealth, pedigree, and formal authority lose meaning. The skill to navigate danger, the knowledge of secret knocks, the ability to interpret subtle gestures, all these replace titles and income. Respect is earned not by birth or wealth, but by understanding, observation, and discretion. The underground teaches that survival demands a different currency than the one society recognizes. Behavior is guided by necessity, not morality. The publican enforces rules that the city above cannot imagine. No shouting, no overt drunkenness, no exposure of illicit activity. Patrons learn to behave in ways that preserve both their safety and that of the community. Laughter is measured, conversation coded, gestures deliberate. What appears orderly to outsiders is cultivated chaos within a city of shadows that survives on subtle negotiation and constant vigilance. In these cellars, respectability is performance, but performance governed by survival, not law. Gender roles are rewritten, subtly but profoundly. Women, often widows or working for survival, operate the pub with authority unacknowledged outside. They direct movement, moderate conflict, and safeguard the vulnerable. Men who would normally dominate socially recognize this authority and comply not out of submission to law, but out of necessity. The hierarchy of the streets is inverted. Ability and awareness outweigh rank. Respect is contextual, fluid, and earned through action rather than lineage or wealth. Public perception is managed invisibly. The cellar is a theater of discretion. Faces are obscured by smoke, voices softened by fear and etiquette, movements rehearsed to avoid attracting attention. Each patron becomes an actor in a carefully staged reality, balancing their need for relief with the threat of exposure. Respectability is thus not a rigid societal code, but a negotiated state, flexible and responsive to circumstance. Survival and propriety coexist in tension, reshaping the very notion of what it means to be respectable. The city above remains oblivious, yet complicit. By enforcing selective law, moralizing, and publishing sensationalized accounts of vice, Victorian London inadvertently strengthens the underground. Patrons internalize warnings, refine discretion, and innovate concealment. Reformers speak of morality, but in practice, the city tolerates deviation, teaching the lesson that respectability can be flexible if survival demands it. The underground becomes an alternative education in ethics, one measured by discretion, endurance, and shared responsibility rather than codified rules. By nightfall, the cellar hums with life. Gin burns in glasses, ether calms trembling hands, and music and whispered conversation continue. Respectability has been rewritten, not abolished, but transformed. It is no longer solely a measure of compliance with above-ground norms. Instead, it is an adaptive skill, the art of navigating danger, preserving community, and maintaining appearance in a world that watches, judges, and punishes unpredictably. In this shadowed city, morality is flexible, and survival is sovereign. The underground pub demonstrates that respectability is not a single code imposed from above, but a set of practices constantly negotiated, enforced, and lived in the margins. Victorian London may applaud virtue, but it is the shadowed, smoky cellars beneath its streets that redefine it. Night after night, the night comes differently now. Victorian London has changed. Gas lamps are fading into electric glow, streets are cleaner, laws are stricter, and reformers watch more closely than ever. The underground pubs that once thrived beneath cobblestone and brick are fewer, diminished by decades of raids, regulation, and urban redevelopment. Yet for those who remain, The ritual continues. The last drink below street level is both an act of necessity and a farewell to an era that refuses to vanish entirely. Patrons arrive with measured caution. They have learned every trick, every pattern, every subtle rhythm required to navigate the cellar safely. The knocks on the door are precise, the steps deliberate, the gestures rehearsed. Smoke curls faintly in the air, not only to obscure faces but to preserve tradition. Candles are trimmed, lanterns shielded, and bottles arranged with care. Every detail matters. Tonight is no ordinary night. It is the culmination of decades of survival, adaptation, and secrecy. The gin burns as always. It flows thick and sharp, warming bodies that have endured cold streets, long labor, and the weight of unspoken rules. For some, it is medicine, for others, ritual. Each sip is deliberate, a farewell to the simplicity of indulgence and a recognition of the skill required to exist below. Ether is measured with equal care, inhaled slowly to calm nerves, frayed by vigilance, and the unspoken knowledge that exposure has become riskier than ever. Memory permeates the room. Walls remember every knock, every hurried glance, every whispered confession. The floorboards retain the imprint of thousands of shoes. Smoke still carries traces of conversations past. Patrons speak softly, aware that this is more than a night of drinking. It is an act of continuity, an homage to those who came before, and a testament to the endurance of human need. Each movement echoes with generations of skill, silence, and survival. Women behind the bar orchestrate the evening with quiet authority. Every gesture is calculated: where to place a bottle, which patron to guide, how to intervene in potential conflict without disrupting the rhythm. They are the invisible stewards of tradition, ensuring that the cellar operates as it always has, even as the world above tightens its scrutiny. Their presence is both reassurance and command, a living connection between past and present. Even in decline, danger persists. The law has grown more vigilant. Neighbors, newly aware of clandestine activity, whisper warnings that travel faster than ever. Fire, disease, and human error still threaten, though experience tempers these risks. Each patron is hyper-aware, moving with precision, speaking in hushed tones, and observing both the room and their own body for signs of vulnerability. Survival is fragile, but skill and discipline maintain it for a final night. As the hour wanes, silence settles. Glasses are drained, lanterns extinguished, and final words whispered. Patrons rise, careful and deliberate, retracing steps up narrow stairways into the city above. Smoke lingers in hair and clothing. Scent of gin persists, a reminder that the underground, though fading, has not vanished entirely. Children, if present, learn one last time the lessons of shadow, discretion, and endurance. The cellar empties. The last drink is consumed. The final candle burns low, and beneath the streets, the space waits in stillness, haunted by memory and tradition. The city above moves forward, unaware of the persistence that lies beneath. Yet in the quiet, in the lingering scent and shadow, the pulse of the underground remains a heartbeat of necessity, secrecy, and survival. This is the last drink below street level, but the legacy endures, whispered in walls, remembered in smoke, and carried forward by those who know how to descend. Dawn arrives with pale indifference. The streets of Victorian London gleam wet with frost and coal dust, gas lamps extinguished, windows fogged by early breath and cold. Life above resumes its rigid rhythm. Merchants sweep thresholds, clerks calculate ledgers, labourers trudge to docks, and the city itself exhales in preparation for another day of order, propriety, and performance. Yet beneath the pavement, in basements and hidden vaults, a pulse continues, a subtle, persistent heartbeat that defies law, morality, and expectation. The city still drinks, The underground never truly vanished. Even as legislation tightened, raids increased, and reformers triumphantly proclaimed victories, need persisted. The poor, the weary, the overlooked, and the desperate continued to descend, seeking warmth, solace, and discretion. Gin still burns in small glasses, ether still calms frayed nerves, and smoke still hangs thick, softening the edges of human presence. The cellar remains a refuge where hierarchy, fear, and law are subordinated to survival. Patterns endure across generations. Knocks remain precise, steps deliberate, glances meaningful. Children learn the rhythm instinctively, how to navigate shadows, where to place a hand, when to hold breath. Adults move with practiced caution, aware that exposure could bring fines, imprisonment, or social ruin. The lessons of the past passed orally, observed silently, enforced subtly, ensure continuity. The underground adapts, evolves, and persists, its protocols internalized by those who must live within its walls. The architecture still shapes life. False walls, narrow staircases, hidden chambers, and reinforced floors are more than physical structures, they are instruments of survival. The design of the cellar enforces caution, guides behavior, and protects the vulnerable. Even as some spaces are repurposed or lost to redevelopment, the principles endure. Concealment, observation, and controlled movement remain paramount. The city above believes it regulates behavior. The cellar proves otherwise. Humanity thrives quietly. Within the shadows, laughter resumes, whispers pass, and confessions are shared. Women behind the bar exercise authority with subtlety and precision, mediating disputes, safeguarding the inexperienced, and maintaining equilibrium. Patrons, regardless of class, navigate the delicate social balance, earning respect through observation, caution, and understanding rather than birth or wealth. In smoke and dim candlelight, the city's rigid divisions dissolve, replaced by a functional hierarchy dictated by skill and awareness. Danger lingers, shaping vigilance. Even now, the risk of fire, disease, and discovery informs every action. Gin burns, ether calms, and every movement is deliberate. The threat of law persists, not always immediate, but constant enough to maintain discipline. The underground teaches patience, foresight, and awareness in ways that the city above cannot replicate. Its lessons are subtle, embedded in gestures, timing, and silence. The city may scorn, condemn, and attempt to erase it, but the need remains stronger than authority. The streets above function on labor, order, and compliance, but beneath them, necessity drives dissent. The city survives in part because it cannot eliminate the clandestine spaces that allow its citizens to endure. The underground pub is not merely illicit, it is essential. It is a shadow economy, a confessional, a sanctuary, and a school in survival. And so the city still drinks. Gin burns, smoke swirls, and whispered secrets persist. Children learn, adults navigate, and the women and men who manage these spaces maintain the pulse of life beneath the streets. Victorian London may parade virtue above, may legislate morality, may pride itself on order, but below, the human need to endure, to survive, to escape, and to share persists. The city continues, and the underground lives on, quiet, resilient, and eternal.